Welcome back to a second day of the seminar of the World War I organized by UNICEF. Today, like every day, we have excellent speakers and topics that will make you relive the history again. So today we will also follow our schedule as was done on the first day, and remember that at the end of each presentation, we will have the space for question. All questions, please ask them in the chat in the question and answer section. So now, without further ado, let's start our seminar.
Okay, now we continue with the next speaker, Stefan Kurtz. He has a master's degree in military history, master's degree in political science, currently research assistant at the Military History Museum, Military History Institute in Vienna. Since 2013, participation in several exhibition projects, among others as a curator since 2020, member of the Australian Commission of Providence Research and Providence Researcher in terms of Austrian Art Restitutions Act. In addition, since 20 dissertation project, University of Vienna, of the history of the KUK. Here is Museum of the Military History during the First World War. So, Stefan Kurtz, we say welcome to you. It's a pleasure to have you here today, and I give you the floor to begin this amazing presentation.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to have the opportunity today to talk about the so-called Italian front in the First World War from an Austro-Hungarian point of view. Considering the time available, I will focus on giving a short overview on the military operations itself and have to spare out the other important aspects like prisoners of war, propaganda, occupation, and other things. I will first talk about the preconditions and circumstances of the fight in political, military, and topographical terms. Then I will discuss the events between May 1915 and the 12th Battle of Desenzio, and will end finally with the events in 1918 and the outcome of the fighting. Now let's come to the preconditions, political preconditions, and the path to the outbreak of the war. The political constellation that ultimately, this was one too far. The political constellation that ultimately led to the war between Italy and Austria-Hungary was characterized on the one hand by the European alliance architecture and on the other hand by the specific bilateral history of the two countries. The Kingdom of Sardinia-Piedmont, from which the Kingdom of Italy emerged, had ousted the Habsburg monarchy almost completely from Italy in the course of the Italian unification. However, the Italian-speaking Trentino, the city of Trieste, and the coastal areas of Istria and Dalmatia, which were partly inhabited by Italian speakers, continued to be regarded as non-liberated territories by the Italian nationalist irredentist movement, and therefore there remained causes for tensions. And at the same time, Italy had joined the defensive alliance between Austria-Hungary and the German Empire in 1882. Thereby, the Triple Alliance with Germany and Austria-Hungary was created, and this was a defensive alliance. And this had some importance and some consequences for the year 1914. However, the two states continued to be suspicious of each other. In addition to the Italian territorial claims, the competition in the Balkans contributed to this. There, Italy sought to prevent a unilateral increase in power of the Habsburg monarchy. It therefore concluded a pact with Austria-Hungary's main rival, Russia, in Rakonici in October 1999, concerning the Balkans. Of particular importance to both Italy and the Habsburg monarchy was the status of Albania, which was of geostrategic significance due to the Strait of Otranto, where the access to the Adriatic Sea could be controlled. Both Austria-Hungary and Italy geared their own military precautions to a possible mutual threat. The expansion of the navies was largely determined by this fact, and the Allies built expensive fortifications against each other in the valleys and at the passes of the common border. On the Austro-Hungarian side, the Chief of General Staff, Franz Conrad von Hötzendorf, who was in office from 1916, was one of Italy's fiercest opponents. He expected Italy to attack Austria-Hungary as soon as the latter was tied up in a war against another power, and therefore Conrad von Hötzendorf called for a preemptive war against Italy as early as 1907, and he repeated this demand several times thereafter. After Austria-Hungary's declaration of war on Serbia and the war's escalation into a world war on the 1st of August 1914, Italy did not enter the war on the side of its allies. It remained neutral and pointed out that the Triple Alliance was a defensive alliance and that therefore there was no casus foederis. In Italy, politics was divided. Conservative, Catholic, and socialist politicians were in favor of remaining neutral, while part of the liberal and nationalist politicians advocated entering the war. Between August 1914 and April 1915, Italy tried to obtain territorial concessions from Austria-Hungary in the form of a cession of Trentino and Trieste in return for remaining neutral. The Austrian Emperor and his government strictly rejected this, and only in March 1915, and thus too late, showed themselves willing to offer not only French territories for Italian neutrality, but also to cede Trentino. By this time, Italy had already raised its demands and demanded Trieste, Trentino, and the Brenner border. In the meantime, it had already begun negotiations with the Entente in order to sound out what would be offered if it entered the war on their side. On the 26th of April 1915, an agreement was reached and the Treaty of London was signed, which promised Italy Trentino, South Tyrol, Trieste, Istria, and parts of Dalmatia if it entered the war on the side of the Entente. The fact that Austria-Hungary finally offered Trentino, Gorizia, and even parts of South Tyrol, as far as it was Italian-speaking, could no more prevent Italy's declaration of war on Austria-Hungary. And if you look now on the belligerents, the two warring parties, we see that Austria-Hungary was a state with about 51 million inhabitants and a national territory of about 655,000 square kilometers. Italy, on the other hand, was slightly smaller. It had 37 million inhabitants and a national territory of about 290,000 square kilometers. According to some sources, Italy's GDP was about 90% of that of Austria-Hungary, while other studies say that the Habsburg monarchy had an industrial base that was about 80% larger than Italy's industrial base. In fact, for example, the density of the railway network was 65% larger than Italy's railway network. And for example, the coke production, very important for industrial production, was about 500% higher in Austria-Hungary than in Italy. Therefore, in the beginning of the war, the armament production in Austria-Hungary was larger than in Italy. So, for example, Austria-Hungary produced 37% more rifle ammunition and, for example, 47% more rifles than Italy. I have here in the presentation, I have the exact figures of some important points where it's interesting that Italy was able, especially in 1917 and 1918, to catch up and to produce much more artillery and planes and other products than Austria-Hungary, which was especially due to the problems with raw materials, the lack of raw materials in the Habsburg Empire. At the beginning of the war, the Austro-Hungarian armed forces were based on compulsory military service for all 19 to 43-year-olds with conscripts who had to serve for 2 years. This was actually in peacetime, so before 1914. Since 1869, the Austro-Hungarian land forces consisted of 3 components: the 2 territorial armies called Landwehr in German, one for each part of the empire, And they up to 1914, they developed into full frontline troops, and which had the same quality as the formations of the Common Army in terms of equipment and training. The Landwehr also included the so-called Landsturm, which was supposed to represent a third line and was made up of the older age groups and servicemen without prior active service and without military training before the war. So it was supposed to be used for guard duties and the like, but during the World War, it was also used as a replacement for frontline troops. And the so-called Common or Imperial and Royal Army was recruited from the entire monarchy. It was the only military branch that had all branches of military service at its disposal. And the Austro-Hungarian Common War Ministry and the general staff were superordinate to all three components and ensured or had to ensure a uniform and a common command. In peacetime, the army was composed of 14 corps with 2 to 3 divisions each and a total peacetime strength of 450,000 men. But by the end of 1914, an additional 302,000 men had been called up in Austria-Hungary, while losses amounted to about 1,268,000 killed or wounded at the end of 1914. Through further expansion and armament measures, the number of machine guns reached a quite high level in 1915 with around 4,000, and which meant that 4 machine guns could be provided per battalion. Also, artillery was increased since the start of the war up to 4,000 in the year 1915. On the other hand, if you look on the Italian army, the peacetime strength was roughly half of the Habsburg monarchies, with about 265,000 soldiers, but it also had 1,700,000 trained reservists, which were to be, or who were to be drafted and called up in times of war. So there was a field army for 800,000 soldiers was envisaged in August 1914. But at this point of time, still 700,000 modern rifles were missing. So Italy had to use the month of 1914 to invest in armaments to catch up. At the beginning of the war, this resulted in Italy having about 1.5 million soldiers in 14 corps with about 1,900 artillery and 600 machine guns. This meant, however, that not every battalion could be equipped with machine guns, and the machine gun equipment remained below the level of the Imperial and Royal Army, its adversary. So another disadvantage was the insufficient ammunition supply and the fact that Italian regiments were not recruited territorially, but were made up of recruits from the most diverse regions. So this meant this arrangement was for political reasons in the sense of the army as the school of the nation, but it had serious military disadvantages and delayed the mobilization and deployment. And the comparatively poorly developed railway infrastructure was also another reason for that. So if you look now on the theater of war and the topographic conditions, we see that the front created by Italy's entry into war stretched for about 650 kilometers from the Stelvio Pass, or Stilfserjoch in German, on the far west of South Tyrol, to the lower reaches of the Isonzo, which is today called the Socha in Slovenia. The positions, with a total length of about 10,000 kilometers, therefore often ran at 2,700 or 3,200 meters above sea level and reached almost 4,000 meters in the area of the Ortler Mountains. Here was also the highest position of the World War at about 3,900 meters, and the highest gun position of the World War at about 3,845 meters. Here, as in other places, fighting took place even in the glacier on exposed positions. The terrain not only made movement and supply difficult, the rocky subsoil also made the creation of positions and trenches which were necessary for protection a great challenge. Therefore, in the mountains as well as in the karst area near Gorizia, artificial caverns had to be created with rock drills, or karst caves had to be exploited in order to find protection. Little could be achieved with conventional spades, however, on this terrain. In addition, boulders were piled up to form ramparts. On the Italian side, in particular, sandbags were used extensively. Further difficulties arose in the mountains due to natural threats, such as the danger of avalanches, but also due to the fact that projectiles hitting the rock triggered a splintering effect and thus led to considerable injuries. These secondary injuries accounted for a significant share of the total Austro-Hungarian casualties in the karst and high mountains, which is why the introduction of the steel helmet at the end of 1916 was particularly important here. The topography and the natural conditions divided the front in several sections and offered potential lines of advance for the Italian army. In the south, the South Tyrol Trentino area, these were the Adige Valley and the Puster Valley, which would have opened up access to the Drava and the interior of the monarchy. To the east lay the main Karnik Bridge and Tarvisio, a gateway to Villach in Austria, while this and the Adige Valley were covered by fortifications. This was not the case at the extreme east in the Gorizia area. Here there was a potential route of advance into the interior of the Habsburg monarchy. So if we look now at the military operations in the initial phase of the war, we see that the Italian operational plans by the Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Luigi Cadorna, envisaged the deployment of 4 armies and 1 army group. The Italian First Army, with about 6.5 infantry divisions, was to tie down enemy forces in the Ortler, Presanella, Adamello area on the western flank of South Tyrol, while the Fourth Army, with 5 infantry divisions, was to advance in the direction of the Toblach in the Puster Valley in order to open the access to the Drau Valley or Drava Valley and advance into the interior of the Habsburg monarchy. To the right of this, the so-called Karnik group, with around 2 divisions, was deployed to cover the flank of the Italian armies deployed further east and to attack the passes in the Karnik region. The main focus, however, was, as I said, on the Isonzo or Socha. Here, the main attack was to take place in order to advance towards Ljubljana and into the heart of Austria-Hungary. The Italian Second Army was to advance into the Kobarid-Tolmin area. The operational emphasis, however, was on the Third Army in the Gorizia area, which had to secure the Isonzo crossings at Monfalcone. In total, 18 divisions and 2 cavalry divisions of Italy were available for this purpose. Furthermore, strong reserves of 10 infantry divisions and 2 cavalry divisions were kept ready in Veneto. On the Austro-Hungarian side, until May 1915, only weak forces of General Roa's group stood along the 650-kilometer-long border. He had about 120,000 men at his disposal, but among them were hardly any regular troops, but for example, 25,000 volunteer riflemen and the so-called Standschützen from Tyrol, members of rifle clubs who were called up and went to the front in a strength of about 17,000 men. For diplomatic reasons, also no additional fortification measures were taken until April 1915. Meanwhile, Italy had deployed 140,000 men close to the border by mid-April and had begun secret mobilization on the 23rd of April 1915. By mid-June 1915, the Italian army had about 460,000 soldiers with about 1,810 guns available on the front from South Tyrol to Gorizia. But this time, however, the slowness of the deployment and Cadorna's orders urging caution meant that the Italians had already missed the window of opportunity presented to them by Austria-Hungary's weakness. In June 1915, the Austria-Hungary had already reinforced the forces on the Isonzo with 2 battle-hardened and fresh corps, which were combined to form the 5th Army under the soon very famous Croatian-born General Svetozar Borojević from Bojna. Under his command, the Austro-Hungarian soldiers were to stubbornly defend and hold the Isonzo front against 11 Italian offensives until 1917, with heavy losses on both sides. When the Italian offensives began, the Austro-Hungarian commander of the Southwestern Front, Archduke Eugen, was already able to confront them with the Italians with almost 230,000 soldiers and 640 guns. And the main focus of the attacks was the Gorizia area, where the first decisive battle began on the 23rd of June 1915, with an Italian attack that lasted about 2 weeks. The Italian troops were defeated with heavy losses. With heavy losses on both sides. The attackers lost 50,000 men, but the defenders also lost considerable 10,000 soldiers. So if we look now on the war in the mountains, the southwestern front was characterized by particularly mountainous terrain. This stretched from the 3,900 meter high positions of the Ortler group in the west of South Tyrol to the Colorado Ridge and Monte Sapontino on the edge of the Gorizia basin. Although the Italian center of attack was near Gorizia and in the karst, the highest and most inhospitable mountain regions quickly became combat zones as well. At first, the backbone of the defense of the high mountain ranges in South Tyrol was formed by quickly assembled reserves. These were old Landsturm age categories and the contingent of Tyrolean Standschützen, which consisted mainly of those under 19 years and above the age of 43 years. Particularly in the area of the Sesto Alps in the east of South Tyrol, individual patrols played an important role in pretending the deployment of larger formations than was actually the case. The German Alpine Corps also was sent to South Tyrol. It was a very valuable support, but it was deployed purely defensively since Italy and Germany were not at war until August of 1916. And only gradually did continuous positions emerge in the high mountains, even if in some places it continued to be the case that only individual peaks and positions were occupied. Often the forces of nature remained the greatest challenge and threat. The soldiers not only had to contend with difficult terrain, but also with snow and extreme temperatures from October onwards, so during the winter. During the winter months, more soldiers were killed by avalanches than by enemy action. Over the course of the war, the number of avalanche deaths on both sides is estimated at around 60,000 men. On the disastrous 13th December of 1916 alone, around 5,000 men died in both armies together. One of the worst avalanche disasters in the whole history. On the Marmolata Glacier in the east of South Tyrol, alone around 300 Austro-Hungarian soldiers died on this day, on the 13th of December 1916, when the Camp Grand Pots was buried under an avalanche. So on the Marmolata, we also had a very famous ice city, which was actually a battalion camp of caverns and tunnels, which was completely dug into the glacier with a total length of 10 kilometers. It offered protection from shelling and the weather and ensured constant temperatures the whole year over. And the caverns and tunnels were generally an important element of warfare in the mountains. And despite great alpine achievements and successful attacks in detail, neither side was able to achieve operationally effective breakthroughs, as the terrain and fortifications on both sides made it possible to quickly ensure an effective defense after abandoning a certain position or territory. Both sides therefore attempted to collapse enemy positions by using mines. 30 such mine actions were counted in the course of the war. Sometimes hundreds of soldiers were buried at once by a single mine. However, real mass battles also happened in the high mountains. For example, on the Monte Guerra, where 22,000 Italian soldiers fought against 9,000 soldiers from Austria-Hungary. Where 22,000 Italian soldiers and 9,000 soldiers from Austria-Hungary were killed or wounded in the battle in June 1917. These battles were also by no means only fought by real mountain troops. So on the Italian side, we had a great number of mountain troops. These were the Alpini, with 88 battalions. And on the Austro-Hungarian side, we had the so-called Landesschützen, which were called from 1917 on Kaiserschützen. and also to further regiments the Imperial Royal Mountain Rifle Regiments number 1 and number 2, and some other special formations like mountain guide companies and high mountain companies that were just formed during the war. But apart from these mountain troops, soldiers from all regions of the Habsburg monarchy were deployed to the mountains. A special challenge was the supply of the troops in the high mountains. This had to be done by pack animals and porters. On the Austro-Hungarian side, Russian or Serbian prisoners of war were often used as porters. We had to carry loads of 25 kilo into the mountains with great effort. Because of the lack of pack animals on the Austro-Hungarian side, their forces intensified the use of cable cars as a means of transport. But autumn 1918, so at the end of the war, 1,735 kilometers of cable cars or cableways had been built on the Austro-Hungarian side. For the soldiers, in any case, deployment in the high mountains often meant that they not only had to endure severe cold, but also that rations often failed to arrive or arrived only cold, and that amenities such as newspapers or field posts only occasionally made it to the more remote positions. Despite the lower intensity of fighting than on the Isonzo, the battles in the mountains also cost the lives of about 100,000 to 180,000 soldiers during the war. So if you look now back to the Isonzo, there were 4 more battles of the Isonzo in 1915 alone. The Italian chief of staff did not let up in his determination to achieve a breakthrough in the Gorizia basin. Already 10 days after the first Isonzo battle, he ordered fresh troops to line up for the second Isonzo battle, and the third Isonzo battle followed already in October 1915. And in turn, the fourth Isonzo battle happened in November 1915, and ended only on the 11th of December 1915 with the onset of the winter weather. The cornerstone of the Austro-Hungarian front around Gorizia were the targets of these offensive actions. In the north, these were the Monte Sapotino, and in the south, it was the Dober Plateau with the Monte San Michele. Minor gains in terrain and attacks and counterattacks characterized the fierce fighting in this area. By the end of the year, the Italian troops had ultimately made hardly any territorial gains in the 4 Isonzo battles, but had suffered heavy losses of around 174,000 killed and wounded, while Austria-Hungary had also suffered very heavily and had losses of only 26% less. You see the territorial gains of Italy in the course of these Isonzo battles in 1915 on the map on the right side. The fighting in the lower reaches of the Isonzo around Gorizia was in general characterized by the rocky ground, the dryness and lack of water, the difficulty of obtaining rations, and an enormous intensity of artillery fire and subsequent fighting at close range. Because of the ground, defensive positions had to be created from improvised piled up stone walls, and every cart hole had to be exploited. Caravans could only be drilled over time. So, for example, at the third battle of the Isonzo in 1915, only 2,000 men on the Austro-Hungarian side were able to be accommodated in caravans, sinkholes, and caravans, so that they were safe from bullets. The Italian attackers, on the other hand, were driven forward over open terrain in ever new waves of attack, and they got stuck despite really great bravery and suffered heavy losses from machine gun and artillery fire of the defenders. In 1916, in the spring of 1916, a counter-offensive of Austria-Hungary took place after Serbia and Montenegro had been knocked out of the war in the beginning of 1916. And the Austrian-Hungarian chief of staff, Colonel General Franz Conrad von Hötzendorf, believed that the time has come to deal Italy a blow, and as already planned before the war, in the event of a conflict with Italy, he intended to attack frontally from Trentino over the high plateaus of Folgaria and Lavarone. to advance into the plain and to encircle the Italian troops who stood at the east or to the east in the Veneto region. Several obstacles for an offensive occurred. The attack area led over elevations at more than 2,000 meters above sea level, with only a few roads and few supply lines for the attacker. A prerequisite for success was secrecy and the simultaneity of a diversionary attack on the Isonzo in order to prevent the enemy's units from being transferred to South Tyrol. Due to the simultaneous German offensive at Verdun, no German support was available, and the Imperial and Royal Army lacked the forces to take offensive action in both areas at once. Or at the same time. In addition, the start of the offensive was delayed. The Italian army, which recognized the attack intentions in advance, was therefore able to move reinforcements from the Isonzo to South Tyrol and to expand its own positions in 3 lines, which were 20 kilometers deep. When the Imperial and Royal 11th and 3rd Armies attacked on the 15th of May 1916 with 190 battalions and about 1,056 guns, they already faced 125 battalions and 850 guns of the Italians. So the strong and effectively coordinated artillery use of the Austro-Hungarian troops initially made it nonetheless possible to break through the first 2 lines in the narrow attack area. Asiaco and Asiero were taken by the 28th of May 1916. Then, however, the attacking spearheads of the Austro-Hungarian 20th and 3rd Corps soon came to a standstill. In the rough and heavily wooded terrain, their own artillery was no longer able to move fast enough to provide sufficient fire support for the attacking infantry, while at the same time the supply routes for the Italians were shortened. The window of opportunity to break through the second line of the Italians had been missed. Above all, however, the Russian army's Brusilov offensive had begun in Galicia and Bukovina on the 4th of June 1916, which required the transfer of troops to the northeastern front of Austria-Hungary. So the last Austro-Hungarian attack had to be halted on the 15th of June 1916. After about 3 weeks. So despite gains in terrain, the South Tyrol offensive did not achieve its operational goals of breaking through to the plain. The offensive had cost the Imperial and Royal Army losses of about 44,000 men, including 5,000 killed in action. Remarkably, however, the Italian defenders suffered even greater losses, namely around 74,000 men, including 5,700 killed in action and 43,000 taken prisoner. So, but nonetheless, or after this failure of the Austro-Hungarian offensive, the Italian offensive at the Isonzo commenced in 1916 and 1917. Even before the South Tyrol offensive, Italy had already launched a new 5th offensive on the Isonzo in March 1916, but the attacks in the Gorizia area were again unsuccessful and resulted in the loss of 2,000 soldiers each. After the South Tyrol offensive, however, Italy launched its most successful offensive on the Isonzo with the 6th Isonzo battle at the end of July 1916. The Austro-Hungarian troops had not recognized the intention to attack, and with 120 battalions, 638 guns, and 333 mine launchers, the Austro-Hungarians were clearly outnumbered by the attacking Italian forces. At the beginning of August, the Italian Third Army finally succeeded in capturing the 2 cornerstones of the defense of Gorizia, which then had to be evacuated, as was the plateau of Doberdo. So this was a really huge and major success for Italy, and we can also see it on the map on the right hand, which shows these large territorial gains. The offensive resulted, however, in 40,000 casualties for the defenders and even more, 50,000 casualties for the Italian attackers. But also it resulted in the largest territorial gains of all the Isonzo battles for the Italians. So, however, in 2 further Isonzo battles in mid-September and mid-October 1916, the Italian Chief of Staff attempted to extend the success of the 6th Isonzo battle, but he was only able to make minor gains in terrain. So these 2 battles cost the attackers losses of 50,000 men. So in the Ninth Isonzo battle, which commenced at the end of October 1916, it was, however, possible, or the Italians succeeded to breach through the Austro-Hungarian positions, 3 kilometers deep and 8 kilometers wide. And this, in fact, became a threat to the defensive front in front of Trieste, but could ultimately be stabilized with heavy losses on part of the Austro-Hungarian soldiers. So, and in this Ninth Offensive, one reason for the Italian success was the first heavy use of bombers in battle. In 1917, the Italian army maintained its pressure, and under massive material and troop deployment, the Italian army opened the 10th Isonzo battle with a 2.5-day artillery bombardment, 280,000 attackers with 2,200 guns and 1,100 mine launchers faced 165,000 defenders with 1,400 guns and 5,000 mine launchers. So at the point of the main effort of the attack, this was the Armada of Trieste, where 500,000 shells were fired in only a 10-hour artillery engagement during the second attack attempt at the end of May 1917. But the front was held by defenders, and however, north of Gorizia, the Italians were able to establish themselves at the Beinschitze Plateau east of the Sochor or Isonzo with the capture of the Monte Cook. Losses of the attacker were 159,000 men, while the defender lost 76,000 soldiers in this 10th Isonzo battle. Building on the territorial gains of the 10th Isonzo battle, the Italians again took the offensive at the end of August 1917, triggering thereby the 11th Isonzo battle. This was undoubtedly the climax of the Italian offensives on the Isonzo. The Italians fired 1,200,000 shells and also mines from 3,600 guns and 1,700 mortars in August and September 1917, and deployed about 1.5 million soldiers. On the Armada in front of the Trieste, the defenders were able to hold the positions with their last strength. This was quite close, but in the north, however, the Beinschitze Plateau had to be evacuated by the Austro-Hungarians on the 23rd of August 1917 due to a collapse of Austro-Hungarian positions. From then on, the fighting was concentrated on the Monte San Gabriele, the cornerstone of the Austro-Hungarian defense east of Gorizia. With enormous effort in terms of artillery and soldiers, the Italian troops attacked again and again, finally establishing themselves at the summit, but were thrown back by an Austro-Hungarian counterattack on the 10th of September 1917. This ended the Italians' last offensive operation on the Isonzo with losses of about 148,000 men, while the defender had lost 85,000 men. But nonetheless, the defender came to the conclusion, so the Austro-Hungarians came to the conclusion, that they would no longer be able to withstand a further attack due to their inferiority in personnel and material. Therefore, the Central Powers came to the joint or common assessment that the collapse of the Isonzo front could only be prevented by an offensive on their own part. So for this purpose, the German Army Command provided considerable personnel and material support. This included not only 7 infantry divisions, but also strong artillery forces and airborne units, or rather Air Force units, not airborne units, Air Force units, which were indispensable for reconnaissance and the preparation of the offensive. The main focus of the attack was in the Bovec-Tolmin region, where the German 14th Army was deployed under the command of the German General Otto von Below. It was composed of 7 German and 8 Austro-Hungarian divisions. Opposite them was the 2nd Italian Army with 25 infantry divisions and an Alpini group. Although the Italian leadership had become aware of the Central Powers' attacking intentions at an early stage, the Italian troops were surprised on a tactical level by the force of the artillery preparation and the new infantry attack method, which relied on rapid advances into the depth without regard for flank protection. The artillery preparation of the attack, which began at 2 a.m. on the 24th of October 1917, was brief but of an intensity that surprised the Italians and included the use of chemical agents, against which the Italian gas masks offered no protection at this point of time. The use of gas, therefore, had a considerable moral impact, and reports of it caused panic among Italian forces. In the Boeing Basin, 1,000 gas grenades were fired, and 2 Italian battalions were almost completely wiped out by the use of these chemical agents. Rain and fog also hindered Italian barrage fire. The Austro-Hungarian Kraus group was thus able to break through the enemy positions near Boeck. The German-led group Stein also managed to penetrate the enemy positions on Colorad, Grün, and Mürzlevreux. On the 26th of October 1917, the Austro-Hungarian Kraus group took the cornerstone of the Italian third line, Punta di Monte Maggiore, where Cadorna, the Italian chief of staff, had intended to offer sustained resistance. On the same day, the German group Stein, in particularly due to the performance of the Württemberg Mountain Battalion, commanded by Lieutenant Rommel, succeeded in rolling up the ridge from Colorad to Monte Matajur, thus causing the enemy positions to collapse. The Beinschitze Plateau was already evacuated on the 25th of October 1917. This meant that the Austro-Hungarian 1st and 2nd Isonzo armies could also begin their advance. So on the 27th of October 1917, Cadorna had to order the retreat behind the Tagliamento. But the Tagliamento was also taken by the Central Power Forces on the 3rd of November 1917. So the advance of the Central Powers came to a halt only at the Piave. Repeated attempts to establish a foothold on the western bank of the Piave, or to penetrate the pivotal point in the north, the Grappa Mountains, and thus to undermine the Italian defensive front, failed. So on the 2nd of December 1917, the Army High Command ordered the cessation of the offensive. So this offensive, the 12th Battle of Isonzo, had inflicted a heavy defeat on the Italian army. In addition to 40,000 killed and wounded soldiers, the Italian army also lost almost 300,000 prisoners, 3,100 guns, 1,700 mine launchers, and 3,000 machine guns. So heavy material losses as well. The Italian army was badly shattered. The zone of operations was now on Italian territory, and large parts of Veneto had come under Austro-Hungarian occupation. The defeat of Caporetto caused severe shocks in Italy, led to the replacement of the chief of general staff Cadorna, and due to its consequences, Caporetto became deeply anchored in Italy's collective memory. At the same time, it also awakened the Italian will to resist and fight. And with material and personnel support from the Allies, the Italian army managed to consolidate itself in a surprisingly short time and develop new fighting strengths in 1918. So when the Russian Empire collapsed, the Austro-Hungary was able to move troops from the eastern front to the southwestern front. Against this background and the increasingly difficult economic situation, the Habsburg monarchy once more attempted to cross the Piave and achieve a decisive success with an offensive against Italy. So in the meantime, Italy had succeeded in completely reorganizing, consolidating, and repositioning its forces after the Caporetto disaster. Material supplies from the Allies played an important role here. Moral and the will to fight were restored, especially since enemy troops were now on their territory. The aim of the Austro-Hungarian offensive was to reach Brenta, and but above all, it was supposed to tie down forces in order to prevent a shift of Italian forces to the Western Front, where the German offensive was taking place at the same time. In its operational plans, the Imperial and Royal Army High Command did not provide for any center of gravity. Therefore, the offensive plans were bound to fail. The attack on the Asiago and Monte Grappa area got stuck on the first day of the attack on the 15th of June 1918. And on the Piave, 4 Austro-Hungarian corps managed to cross the river. However, the swelling of the Piave and the lack of bridge material and boats, as well as enemy artillery fire, prevented reinforcements and an expansion of the bridgeheads. which were already 5 kilometers deep and 4 kilometers wide in some places. So attacks on the Montello in the north were also successful, but reinforcements, rations, and ammunition could not be supplied. On the 20th of June, 1918, the Austro-Hungarian troops on the western bank were already under such pressure that the withdrawal and cessation or the end of the offensive was ordered. The clear Austro-Hungarian defeat cost the army losses of around 142,000 soldiers in killed and wounded, and inflicted a severe blow to combat morale in particular. And the months to come, the Austro-Hungarian army had suffered a decline in its forces, partly due to the political and economic disintegration of the Habsburg monarchy, which became increasingly noticeable within the army and among the frontline troops. So the food supply, which had already led to catastrophic conditions in the hinterland, increasingly affected the troops. The average weight of the soldiers had fallen to 59 kilo, and in some regiments it was as low as 50 kilo. There was hardly any fodder left for the artillery's horses, and the armament industry was no longer able to compensate for the consumption of ammunition and material, while the Italian armament industry set new production records. Not even all soldiers could be equipped with a complete set of uniforms, and almost half of all divisions had only a third of their required strength. The moral and discipline suffered from these conditions and from the accelerated political disintegration since July 1918, because the demands for statehood of various national movements became more and more present and were accelerated, in particular by the recognition of the Czechoslovak National Council on the part of the Entente powers in the summer of 1918. Therefore, in this situation, the Italian army launched a new offensive. The Italian army had been fundamentally reorganized and consolidated since Caporetto. It had received considerable reinforcements and was supported by 2 British and 1 French division. Also, the morale of the troops was particularly high because the fighting was now on Italian soil. On the emblematic anniversary of Caporetto on 24th of October 1918, the Italian offensive started on the basis of a clear superiority over the defender. The objective was to advance towards Vittorio Veneto and separate the Austro-Hungarian Isonzo army from the 6th Army. After several days of stubborn fighting, the Italian troops succeeded in forcing the crossing of the Piave River in the Moriato area in the section of the Austro-Hungarian 6th Army on the night of the 27th of October 1918, despite bad weather and high water levels. Therefore, until the 29th of October, the Italians were able to further expand the bridgehead. A counterattack planned for that day in the area of the 6th Army did not take place because the Austro-Hungarian divisions concerned refused the order. But that time, the morale of many Austro-Hungarian troops was completely shattered. In the rear, the disintegration of the Habsburg monarchy had already begun. The Hungarian government had ordered its troops back from the southwestern front on the 24th of October, which was partly followed by mutinies of Hungarian regiments. On the 28th of October 1918, also the independent Czechoslovak state was proclaimed in Prague. And this was followed on the next day by the establishment of a South Slav state. Even in Vienna, in the heart of the empire, an independent German-Austrian state was proclaimed on the 3rd of October 1918. On the same day, the general retreat of the Austro-Hungarian troops began on the Piave. The army crossed the Livenza on the 1st November 1918. At the same time, from 3rd of October 1918, armistice negotiations were underway in the Italian village Giusti, with the Italian side effectively demanding an unconditional Austro-Hungarian surrender. In the face of the complete political and military collapse of the Habsburg monarchy, the armistice was nevertheless signed on the 3rd of November 1918. However, the Austro-Hungarian Army High Command ordered the cessation of all hostilities already on the same day, although the armistice did not provide for this until 3 p.m. on the 4th of November 1918. As a result of this order, around 350,000 Austrian-Hungarian soldiers became prisoners of war after they had already laid down their weapons. The total number of soldiers taken prisoner of war by the Italians in the Battle of Vittorio Veneto rose therefore to around 436,000 soldiers. So if we come to a conclusion now, we see that the fierce fighting between the Habsburg monarchy and Italy in the mountains, on the Isonzo River, and in Veneto between May 1915 and November 1918 resulted in enormous human suffering on both sides. About 650,000 Italian soldiers and about 300 to 400,000 Austro-Hungarian soldiers lost their lives. And hundreds of thousands suffered wounds, and some of them, and many, remained permanently disabled or invalid after the war. While the Habsburg monarchy disintegrated at the end of the World War, Italy was able to largely achieve its territorial gains which it had pursued with the attack on Austria-Hungary. It received the Trentino, all of South Tyrol, the Austrian littoral, and Istria, as well as Sava in Dalmatia. However, further demands remained unfulfilled and led to bitterness among Italian nationalists, which want to contribute to the rise of fascism under the banner of a mutilated victory. In the culture of remembrance of both countries, the battles on the Isonzo and in high mountains still have a particularly important place today. While the Isonzo battles stand for the horror of the mass battles of the World War, the battles in the high mountains are still predominantly associated with the natural challenges and the alpine achievements of both sides. On a political level, the fate of South Tyrol, however, which was awarded to Italy despite its approximately 90% German-speaking population in 1918, remained a major point of contention between Italy and the Republic of Austria until 1972. But today, it is considered as a symbol of European integration and successful conflict resolution. And with this, I thank for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this great and interesting presentation. I think that it was a really complete topic that enriched our public. So thank you very much, Stefan.
Welcome.
So we have some questions, of course, that some of our students sent that you know, and we are going to answer one of them. So I just like to hand over to David to get your start with some questions from the public. So, David, ¿qué te parece si iniciamos con algunas preguntas?
Sí, hemos recibido algunas preguntas de nuestros alumnos, con lo cual vamos con la primera de ellas, que dice lo siguiente. El 28 de julio de 1914, el Imperio Austrohúngaro declaró la guerra al Reino de Serbia, acto que sumió a Europa debido al sistema de alianzas imperante en la tercera parte de las guerras balcánicas, que pronto se transformaría en lo que conocemos como la Primera Guerra Mundial o la Gran Guerra. Austria-Hungría tuvo que combatir en varios frentes simultáneamente. ¿Crees que el imperio contaba con medios económicos y militares suficientes para mantener una guerra larga y sostenible?
So, Austria-Hungary showed itself capable of sustaining the war for more than 4 years, but the Allied blockade of maritime trade and the resulting lack of resources at every level soon made itself felt much more strongly in Austria-Hungary than in Germany. Food supplies could no longer be guaranteed, and the civilian population, for example, had only 830 calories per day available in June 1918, and the rations were cut even more in this month to about 90 grams of bread per day, and hunger was really widespread. And at the same time, the heavy industry also collapsed due to the lack of raw materials and especially of coal. So the transport system also collapsed at a certain point of time, and everywhere substitute materials were in use by then. For example, there were shoes with only wooden soles, clothes made out of paper textile, and fodder for the horses mixed with wood and so on. So the Habsburg monarchy ultimately suffered an economic and collapse in 1918. So for sure it wouldn't have been able to endure the war any longer than 1918, I guess.
Thank you, Stefan. Excellent answer.
Thank you.
So, David, tenemos una segunda pregunta también que están haciendo algunos de los alumnos.
Exacto. Dice así. En el otoño de 1918, cuando la situación... En 1918, cuando la situación interior amenazaba con acabar con la monarquía, dos derrotas militares, la batalla de Dorian en Macedonia acaecida en septiembre y la de Vittorio Veneto en el frente italiano en octubre, decidieron la suerte del imperio, su desmembramiento y el derrocamiento de la Casa de Habsburgo, de los tronos de Austria y de Hungría. ¿Crees que si Austria-Hungría no hubiera dependido tanto del ejército alemán, hubiera podido tener más independencia política y militar para poder pedir la paz mucho antes con los aliados y salvar así la monarquía de los Habsburgo?
Actually, the new emperor Charles the First, who came to power in the end of 1916, had indeed been looking for a way to conclude a peace with the Allied powers from the very beginning, and was ultimately even prepared to conclude a separate peace with them. Which is shown by, or as the affair surrounding the so-called Sixtus letters showed in the spring of 1918. However, he was not strong enough to overcome the internal and external resistance against separate peace. And one major obstacle, in fact, was were the far-reaching territorial demands of Italy, on which they insisted, but which the Austrian Emperor was not willing to grant after 3 years of heavy fighting and heavy losses. So the disclosure of the Sixtus letters in the spring of 1918 led to Austria-Hungary having itself forced Austria-Hungary to bind itself even more to Germany, and this favored the willingness of the Allies to opt for the breakup of the Habsburg monarchy, starting with summer of 1918. Before that, they were willing to accept only some territorial losses of the Habsburg monarchy, but stuck to the existence of the Habsburg monarchy. But from that point of time, they changed the policy and decided on breaking the Habsburg monarchy up.
Thank you, Stefan, for your answer. Tenemos una tercera pregunta que dice: el imperio, fiel aliado del imperio alemán desde la Liga de ambos en 1879, desempeñó un complejo papel en la guerra, ya que tanto los enemigos como los aliados ansiaban apoderarse de parte de su territorio. Por su parte, y como todos los demás países beligerantes, ¿crees que el imperio austrohúngaro hubiera obtenido ventajas económicas en caso de que el resultado de la guerra fuese favorable para Austria-Hungría?
Of course, that depends on the concrete outcome of the war. I mean, in the last decades, before the Great War, the Habsburg monarchy showed quite dynamic economic development, but it still had to catch up with the other major European powers in economic terms. And unlike other powers, it did not have any economic colonial interests, but the Balkans were an area of economic interest, as the customs war with Serbia from 1906 to 1908 and 1911 shows. In this respect, a favorable end to the war would probably have been beneficial, had beneficial effects for the Habsburg monarchy. Above all, however, the catastrophic economic consequences of the dissolution of the Habsburg monarchy would have been averted for what later became the Republic of Austria, because with the disintegration of Austria-Hungary, parts of companies, large companies that were located outside of the territory of the Republic of Austria in foreign countries, but also in other successor states of the Habsburg monarchy, were confiscated by foreign countries. And at the same time, the sales and raw material markets collapsed or got lost. So as a result, it was not until the end of the 1940s, actually, so right after the Second World War, that the Republic of Austria was able to surpass the per capita GDP level of 1913.
Thank you, Stefan.
Thank you. Thank you,
Creo que
Stefan.
tenemos la última de las preguntas, Laura.
Correcto, sí, tenemos la última para Estefan, para que pueda realizársela también a él.
Muy bien. Dice así, nos comenta el alumno, la declaración de guerra a Serbia del 28 de julio hizo que las reservas del Biestaffel se enviasen al sur, siguiendo los planes militares trazados. La movilización parcial contra el vecino del sur había empezado el día 25. Los austrohúngaros aún creían que la contienda circunscribía a los Balcanes. A finales de mes, no obstante, las señales indicaban cada vez más claramente que Rusia no permanecería neutral en el conflicto y, pese a todo, el Biestaffel se envió al sur y no al noroeste. La pregunta sería, ¿crees que el retraso que causó esta compleja maniobra permitió a los rusos ocupar la región el primer mes del conflicto y cuando se verificó privó a los austrohúngaros de la ventaja numérica frente a Serbia que, podríamos decir, quizá le hubiese permitido vencerla?
Actually, I would completely agree with the assessment of this question, or included in this question. Basically, the Austro-Hungarian General Staff had taken into account in its planning before the war that a war against Serbia carried the danger that Russia would intervene in the war, or in such a war, and on the other hand, Serbia on the other hand could attack Austria-Hungary if it was at war with Russia at any time. So therefore, actually, there was supposed to be a flexible three-part division into A group or A staffer, a B group or B staffer, and a minimal group Balkans. And depending on the development of the situation, the B group was to be deployed to the Russian front or in the Balkans. However, the planning for the rail relocation was too inflexible for that. So there was also due to the lack of direct train connections between Vojvodina and Galicia in the northeast of the Habsburg monarchy. So the Chief of General Staff, Franz Konrad von Hötzendorf, pointed that out to the foreign minister as early as on the 29th of July 1914, that it would not be possible to switch to wartime, to the war plan R, also the planning against Russia, and relocate the B group in time if a certain point in time is missed. So, however, Austria-Hungary was determined to refrain from any provocation towards Russia, and in order not to appear as an aggressor, apart from the declaration of war against Serbia. So, but in military terms, the order for the general mobilization came too late, and this had severe consequences. And it happened what the Chief of General Staff had warned, and the B group or B Staffel was not left. Couldn't be left or didn't stay long enough on the Balkan front in order to intervene effectively into the fighting there, while on the Russian front in the northeast, the B group was already missing on the right flank, and it was there that its troops would have been important and urgently needed in this decisive battle or deciding battle of Lvov or Lemberg in September 1914. So this was, in fact, a major problem.
Excellent answer. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for providing such a great presentation for all the audience and all our students from INISEC. So
thank you.
I would like, thank you very much, Stefan. So I would like to give the floor to David to give a brief summary of what we've seen in the presentation. Te cedo la palabra, David, para realizar ese breve resumen que también realizamos o que vimos en este momento en la ponencia con Stefan.
Muy bien, muchas gracias, Laura. Nada, ante todo, agradecer al profesor Stefan Kurz, investigador en el Museo de Historia Militar y en el Instituto de Historia de Viena, por su excelente participación en este seminario sobre la Primera Guerra Mundial. Quiero felicitarle por su magnífica ponencia sobre Austria-Hungría y el frente italiano en la Primera Guerra Mundial. Stephen Kurz nos ha ilustrado con un detallado análisis histórico sobre la situación del ejército y del imperio durante la guerra, y esto en concreto en el frente italiano, resumiendo muy detalladamente las fuerzas enfrentadas en el frente entre las tropas austrohúngaras e italianas. Hay que recordar que esas penurias que él nos ha explicado muy bien y con esas fotografías que hemos ido viendo a lo largo de la ponencia, que detallaban y mostraban esas penurias sufridas por los soldados en el frente italiano, debidas también a esa contienda, a la agudización de los nacionalismos y también a las acciones del emperador que precipitaron, sin lugar a dudas, la disgregación del ejército a comienzos de noviembre de 1918. Recordemos que para entonces ya no era uno de los pilares de la monarquía el ejército austrohúngaro, como lo había sido aún en 1914. La ofensiva italiana del 24 de octubre del 18, que bien nos ha explicado el profesor Stephen Kurz, fue el factor crucial en el derrumbamiento del imperio, y pese a la encarnizada resistencia de algunas posiciones, el ejército en su conjunto no fue capaz de obtener la acometida italiana, cada día más potente, evidentemente. Los italianos pues, abrieron brecha en las líneas austrohúngaras, cuyas unidades huyeron en desbandada, divisiones enteras se negaron a seguir combatiendo y al final ya lo conocemos todos. Muchas gracias, Laura. Thank you very much for your presentation, Stefan.
Thank you, Stefan. And we finish. Excellent work.
Hey, thank you for inviting me and for having me. Yeah.
So to continue, let's introduce our next speaker, Pierre Muller and Vencedores. Pierre has a master's degree in history with a specialization of communication of history, military history. Currently is curator of the Armoured Artillery Naval Collection of the World Heritage Institute Brussels. He was French-speaking project manager at the World Heritage Institute, and before that he worked as a protection officer of the Office of the General Commissioner for the Refugees and Stateless Persons. And also let us introduce our speaker, Vencedores. He has education and master's degree in history at the Catholic University of the Louvain-la-Neuve, professional experience and project manager at the World Heritage Institute. So let's welcome Ben and Pierre. Thank you so much for joining us in this event, and the audience is all yours to begin your presentation.
Ok, donc bonjour à tous. Donc je m'appelle Pierre, comme on l'a expliqué, donc je m'appelle Pierre Muller, je suis gestionnaire de collection au Musée royal de l'armée. Mon collègue Ben Scraverus travaille dans mon département également comme chargé de mission. Donc aujourd'hui, nous allons vous parler des batailles de Mons et de Charleroi, donc qui ont lieu en août 1914 en Belgique. Donc pour évoquer ces batailles, nous allons aborder ce thème en 6 étapes. Donc nous allons tout d'abord évoquer avec vous les premiers jours de guerre, la préparation des différents adversaires, l'approche de l'affrontement, le combat lui-même, ainsi que le bilan de ces batailles. Nous allons terminer notre exposé en expliquant les différences entre ces deux affrontements qui ont lieu donc en août 1914.
Donc moi je vais vous présenter un petit préambule rapide sur l'existence de la Belgique, étant donné que c'est ça qui va être important dans le développement et le début de la Première Guerre mondiale. Donc initialement, la Belgique est censée être un État indépendant et perpétuellement neutre, qui est créé assez tard, donc c'est-à-dire en 1830, à la suite d'une révolution à l'encontre du pouvoir en place, à savoir les Pays-Bas. La Belgique se dote d'un souverain en 1831. Les Pays-Bas refusent l'autonomie belge et par conséquent envahissent le territoire qui est nouvellement indépendant. Et il faut attendre une intervention française, notamment avec le siège d'Anvers, pour que le territoire national soit rétabli et que des traités, à savoir le traité des 24 articles, viennent reconnaître officiellement l'existence de la Belgique. Donc, son existence est garantie légalement par des garants de sa neutralité, à savoir le Royaume-Uni, l'Empire autrichien, la France, la Prusse et l'Empire russe. Cela signifie que si la Belgique est envahie par un pays, les garants de sa neutralité sont obligés d'intervenir pour préserver sa souveraineté nationale. Donc, les premiers jours de guerre, alors là, ce qui est important à dire, c'est que les nationalismes européens latents à la fin du 19e siècle jusqu'au début du 20e siècle vont engendrer une guerre dont le summum est atteint au moment de l'assassinat de l'archiduc François Ferdinand. Et je vous passe les détails, mais toujours est-il que le 4 août 1914, l'Allemagne, par le jeu des alliances, va envahir la Belgique afin de pouvoir attaquer la France. L'Allemagne espérait que la Belgique, dont le souverain, le roi Albert Ier, qui était le cousin de Guillaume II, allait laisser passer ses troupes vers la France, mais le roi Albert Ier refuse de laisser passer les troupes allemandes et un combat s'engage entre les forces belges et les forces allemandes. Les objectifs du plan allemand sont de pouvoir venir à bout rapidement de la France en évitant ses fortifications et en transportant ensuite les troupes qui ont vaincu la France vers le front de l'Est avant que la Russie ne puisse mobiliser son armée. L'objectif de ceci est en fait de pouvoir répondre à l'alliance franco-russe de 1898, de réaliser une manœuvre enveloppante qui, comme je l'ai dit, évitait un axe défensif qui est basé sur Belfort, Épinal, Toul, Verdun, et pour éviter également les Alpes et la Suisse qui sont évidemment difficiles à prendre. Ce plan est mis en place par von Schlieffen, le chef du quartier général allemand, en 1905. C'est un peu son testament militaire. Et son plan est réutilisé par von Moltke le Jeune, qui va l'utiliser comme base, comme brouillon du plan de 1914.
Donc, au 4 août 1914, l'armée belge est encore une petite armée. Par bien des égards, elle paraît encore archaïque aux yeux des autres armées européennes. En effet, comme on le voit ici sur la diapositive, les uniformes évoquent encore largement le 19e siècle. Ce qui est important également de savoir, c'est qu'à l'époque, la Belgique n'a pas encore une grande tradition militaire. Les rares affrontements auxquels l'armée belge a pris part au cours du 19e siècle ne se sont pas soldés par des victoires éclatantes, loin de là. Et donc, en 1914, l'armée belge est en pleine réorganisation. Elle commence à toucher de nouveaux armements, notamment au niveau de l'artillerie. Pour l'armée allemande qui rentre sur le territoire belge en 1914, l'affaire doit être vite conclue face à une armée qui paraît petite et sous-équipée. Néanmoins, contre toute attente, en fait, l'armée belge va opposer une résistance très farouche aux troupes allemandes. Il y a plusieurs raisons à cela. Tout d'abord, le fait que les soldats belges défendent concrètement leur territoire national. Un autre élément est également les premiers succès, en fait, rapidement enregistrés par l'armée belge lors de combats défensifs, notamment la défense des forts de Liège, qui, bien qu'étant chaotique, va être montée en épingle par la propagande de guerre alliée. Il est également à noter que l'invasion de la Belgique va provoquer l'entrée en guerre de la Grande-Bretagne, qui était garante de la neutralité belge à l'époque. Donc, malgré une résistance héroïque, les Belges sont forcés au repli. À la mi-août, les forts de Liège, qui ont résisté pendant une dizaine de jours, vont tomber les uns après les autres sous les coups de l'artillerie lourde allemande. À ce sujet, l'explosion du fort de Lonsin va être un véritable choc pour les défenseurs de la place de Liège. Il est à noter qu'à l'époque, le système défensif belge repose sur trois places fortes. Donc, tout d'abord Liège face à l'Allemagne, Namur face à la France et le réduit fortifié d'Anvers. Il est à noter qu'à l'époque, la Belgique n'a pas réellement un plan de défense très précis en raison de divergences de vues entre politiques et militaires. Donc, les premiers jours de la guerre se déroulent comme suit. Donc, comme on l'a dit précédemment, les forces allemandes violent la neutralité belge le 4 août 1914. Du 5 au 16, l'armée belge se défend autour des forts de Liège. Du 20 au 25 août, ce seront les forts de Namur qui seront assaillis par les Allemands, alors que pendant ce temps se déroule la bataille de Charleroi. La bataille de Mons, elle, arrivera un petit peu plus tard, dans les jours qui suivent la bataille de Charleroi.
Alors, nous allons voir qu'il y a une divergence de préparation chez les adversaires et que, effectivement, l'armée allemande, l'armée française et l'armée britannique ne sont pas réellement comparables. Tout d'abord, nous allons donc voir les différences entre les plans, les uniformes, les équipements, etc. Et tu peux passer à la dia suivante. Voilà.
Ouais, donc nous allons commencer par l'armée allemande. Donc, à l'époque, au moment de l'entrée en guerre, en août 1914, l'armée allemande paraît être l'une des plus puissantes de l'époque. Tout d'abord, de par son nombre. Donc, à cette époque, donc, ce sont plus ou moins 5 millions d'hommes qui sont mobilisables en Allemagne. Outre le nombre, l'armée allemande est aussi remarquable de par la qualité de la formation de ses soldats et surtout de son encadrement. En effet, à l'époque, les officiers allemands sont formés au combat interarmes, ce qui est un élément important et qui sera très important lors des combats de Mons et de Charleroi. De plus, outre la qualité de la formation de ces hommes, l'armée allemande dispose d'un armement perfectionné à l'époque. Donc, le fusil Mauser est d'une qualité importante. D'ailleurs, il sera réutilisé lors de la Seconde Guerre mondiale dans une version légèrement modifiée. L'armée allemande dispose également d'un certain nombre de mitrailleuses, donc une arme qui causera des pertes énormes dans les rangs français, notamment lors de la bataille de Charleroi. Et enfin, l'armée allemande dispose également d'une artillerie nombreuse et bien préparée. Bon, certes, le 77 mm allemand de l'époque est inférieur au canon de 75 français, mais le point fort de l'artillerie allemande vient essentiellement de ses obusiers de campagne, notamment ceux de 105 mm, qui joueront un rôle important, notamment lors de la bataille de Mons. Il est à noter que cette artillerie est incluse dans les divisions d'infanterie, ce qui permet d'avoir une collaboration interarmes assez efficace.
A contrario, dans l'armée française, nous avons un fonctionnement qui est relativement différent. Donc, au nombre d'hommes qui est mobilisable, il y en a 3 600 000, ce qui est assez comparable finalement avec l'armée allemande. Il y en a d'autres qui sont présents dans les colonies françaises. Ce sont majoritairement des citoyens soldats. Donc, à la suite de la Révolution française, c'est chaque Français qui va devenir un militaire. Mais la pensée militaire française, ébranlée par la guerre de 1870 franco-prussienne, est relativement erratique. Par exemple, entre 1875 et 1913, nous avons 20 plans différents qui vont être mis sur pied. Le dernier plan étant le plan 17, qui concentre les forces sur la frontière belge et en Alsace-Lorraine, et qui vise à faire des offensives justement dans l'Alsace et la Lorraine. L'armement français est bon, mais comme Pierre l'a signalé, contrairement à l'armée allemande, il n'y a pas d'équivalent au niveau des pièces plus lourdes que le 75 mm. Le pantalon rouge, c'est la France, donc ça c'est une phrase très connue pour qualifier justement l'armée française de 1914, qui a été prononcée par le ministre Mesmy. Et en fait, ça représente bien la façon de faire la guerre française en 1914, c'est-à-dire qu'on hérite des traditions directes de 1870 et on veut venger la défaite de Sedan. Il y a un manque d'instruction latent au sein de l'armée française qui est utilisé aussi comme une force de police, donc pour mater par exemple des révolutions, enfin des manifestations, pardon. Il y a pas ou peu de coordination interarmes et pas de perspective d'avancement au sein de l'armée, ce qui va réfréner un petit peu l'envie des sous-officiers et des officiers subalternes. On croit en la vertu guerrière du soldat français et on pense que c'est la vertu guerrière du soldat français qui va pouvoir sauver l'armée. La façon de penser à cette époque-là est majoritairement basée sur l'offensive à outrance qui est prônée par Foch Grand-Maison et qui est fortement influencée justement par la défaite de 1870. Et cette offensive à outrance est en fait de pouvoir attaquer partout où l'on peut. Et d'un point de vue tactique, c'est toujours chercher l'engagement et le corps à corps avec l'adversaire.
Concernant l'armée britannique, donc clairement par rapport aux Français ou aux Allemands, l'armée de terre britannique est à l'époque un petit pousset, avec environ 250 000 hommes dans l'armée d'active. La raison est que la Grande-Bretagne considère que sa principale force défensive et offensive est la Royal Navy. Néanmoins, au de ces 250 000 hommes, dont la moitié est casernée outre-mer, l'armée britannique peut compter sur une réserve relativement importante de 500 000 hommes. Les soldats britanniques, à l'époque, sont des soldats bien formés. Certains, pour ne pas dire la plupart, ont une expérience des guerres coloniales et notamment de la guerre des bourgs. Outre cela, le soldat britannique donc, bénéficie de cette expérience de la guerre des bourgs au niveau de son armement et de son équipement. Donc, il va être doté d'un uniforme kaki, très propice au camouflage. Il va également être doté d'un système de brelage en web, qui est nettement plus confortable que les brelages en cuir de ses homologues allemands et français. Et au niveau de l'armement, il bénéficie d'un très bon fusil, donc le Lee Enfield Mark III, qui lui permet une cadence de tir d'environ 15 coups par minute, ce qui est assez élevé et qui va jouer un rôle important, notamment lors de la bataille de Mons. Au niveau des armes de soutien, il bénéficie de la mitrailleuse Vickers, donc qui est comparable à la Maxim allemande, tout en étant plus légère, une 30aine de kilos contre une 60aine pour l'allemande. L'armée britannique de l'époque a un entraînement relativement classique, donc basé sur le tir et la marche, mais elle est préparée à une guerre de mouvement en Europe ainsi qu'à des guerres coloniales.
Nous arrivons donc à l'approche de l'affrontement qui va se dérouler aux alentours des 20-21 août 1914. Évidemment, nous devons parler des armées qui vont s'affronter à Charleroi et à Mons. Alors, commençons tout d'abord avec la deuxième armée allemande, laquelle est commandée par Karl von Bülow. Sous ses ordres se trouvent Karl von Einem du 7e corps, Otto von Emich du 10e corps et Karl von Plettenberg, qui lui est dans le corps de la garde. Un corps au sein de l'armée allemande, un corps d'armée, représente grosso modo 25 000 hommes. Il faut savoir qu'à ces trois corps d'armée sont adjoints des équivalents, mais de réserve. La formation des soldats de réserve allemands est assez développée et ils sont presque équivalents à des corps d'actifs. Par conséquent, on peut dire que ce seront 6 corps d'armée qui seront mobilisés sur le front. Malheureusement, pour les Allemands, ils combattent depuis le 4 août. Par conséquent, leurs soldats sont relativement épuisés. Donc, ils ont déjà dû attaquer Liège. Ils arrivent ensuite sur Namur. Et là, ils se déplacent vers Charleroi et Mons. Et par conséquent, ils sont dans un état de fatigue qui est assez avancé, ce qui aura évidemment un impact sur la suite des opérations. Alors, au niveau de l'armée française, celle qui va affronter la deuxième armée, c'est la 5e armée française, commandée par Charles Lanrezac. Ici, on voit qu'un corps d'armée français est un peu plus, oui, même beaucoup plus nombreux qu'un corps d'armée allemand, donc c'est grosso modo 40 000 soldats. Lanrezac a sous ses ordres Franchet d'Espéret du 1er corps, Henri Sauret du 3e corps, Mardoché-Valabrègue du 4e groupement de division de réserve, Jacques de Maslatry qui lui tient le 18e corps et enfin Desforges qui lui tient le 10e corps. Petite particularité pour la 5e armée française, dans sa 6e division d'infanterie, nous avons le général Philippe Pétain qui deviendra par la suite le commandant en chef des forces françaises. Le 2e corps d'armée de la 5e armée n'est pas présent sur cette partie du front, il est en Gaume, aux environs de Virton, aux alentours du 22 août, et alors il y a une présence de troupes coloniales dans le 18e corps d'armée, avec notamment les 37e division et 38e division d'infanterie. Les premiers soldats arrivent à Charleroi le 16 août, mais ils n'y restent pas longtemps. En fait, ils vont vraiment y revenir le 20 pour préparer l'affrontement qui va bientôt avoir lieu. Les Français se positionnent sur la Sambre. Donc, on a le 18e corps qui est à l'extrême gauche, suivi du 3e corps, du 10e corps et du 1er corps qui, lui, se retrouve sur la Meuse. Les positions françaises sont destinées à pouvoir mener des actions offensives pour rentrer en confrontation avec la 2e armée allemande. Donc, au départ, les Français ne sont pas là pour défendre outre mesure cette rive-là de la Sambre.
Donc, côté britannique, l'unité britannique qui va combattre à Mons va être le corps expéditionnaire britannique. Donc, dès avant la guerre, en cas de conflit en Europe, le gouvernement britannique a décidé de la création d'un corps expéditionnaire qui pourrait intervenir sur le continent. Le corps expéditionnaire qui est envoyé en Belgique en août 1914 est commandé par John French. Celui-ci a sous son commandement le premier corps de Douglas Haig et le second corps commandé par Horace Smith Dorrien. À ces deux corps, composés de divisions d'infanterie, est adjoint une division de cavalerie commandée par Edmund Allenby. Ces unités vont arriver tout d'abord en France, via les ports de Boulogne et du Havre notamment, et vont marcher jusqu'à la frontière belge où ils vont se regrouper. Par la suite, ils vont pénétrer sur le territoire belge jusqu'à Mons. Les unités du corps expéditionnaire britannique arrivent à Mons du 21 au 23 août. Les dernières unités à arriver arriveront dans la région de Mons le 23 août vers 3 heures du matin, donc c'est-à-dire le jour même de l'affrontement avec les Allemands. Les unités qui arrivent à Mons sont, à l'instar des Allemands, déjà épuisées. Pourquoi? Elles ont marché depuis les ports français sous un soleil de plomb. Qui plus est, elles sont équipées d'uniformes en laine, ce qui est assez éprouvant physiquement, y compris pour des soldats entraînés. Ici, on voit des soldats britanniques du 2e régiment de fusiliers au repos sur la grande place de Mons la veille de l'affrontement. À leur arrivée, outre se reposer, les troupes britanniques érigent des fortifications de campagne. Étant donné leur arrivée tardive sur ce qui va devenir le champ de bataille de Mons, celles-ci n'ont pas le temps de se fortifier de façon très approfondie. Elles vont s'établir de la manière suivante. Donc, elles vont s'établir sur le canal Mons-Condé. L'unité de cavalerie d'Allenby va faire la jonction avec les différents corps français qui sont présents dans la région de Charleroi. Face à eux arrivent les corps de Bülow, donc entre Charleroi et Namur, et le corps de Von Kluck qui va tomber sur le corps expéditionnaire britannique positionné entre Mons et Condé le long du canal.
On doit également signaler la 3e armée de von Hausen qui, elle, se trouve dans les environs de Dinant et aura un impact considérable sur le déroulement de la bataille de Charleroi.
Donc, dans la région de Mons, les Britanniques établissent leur position le long du seul obstacle naturel présent dans la région, le canal entre Mons et Condé. À l'époque, ce canal est largement franchissable, étant donné qu'il est traversé par plus d'une dizaine de ponts. Un point faible dans les positions britanniques, et qui sera exploité par les Allemands, est un saillant au-dessus de Mons, au niveau des villages de Nimy et d'Aubourg.
Si on regarde les positions françaises, on voit également que la 5e armée se trouve dans un saillant qui est composé de Charleroi, Namur et Dinant.
Donc maintenant, nous allons présenter les combats.
Donc on va commencer par Charleroi de manière purement chronologique. Et la bataille de Charleroi débute le 21 août. C'est surtout aux environs de Auvelais, Arcimon et Tamines. En fait, Charleroi n'est pas vraiment la ville principale de la bataille de Charleroi, mais c'est surtout les petits villages tels que Auvelais, Arcimon, Tamines, etc. Pourquoi? Eh bien, en fait, l'enjeu de ces combats, c'est de pouvoir prendre les ponts qui s'y trouvent afin de pouvoir franchir la Sambre pour pouvoir continuer d'avancer dans les terres en Belgique pour aller vers la France. Les deux forces en présence n'imaginent pas être aussi importantes. Par exemple, les cavaliers français qui partent en reconnaissance sous-estiment de moitié les forces allemandes. L'artillerie allemande va pilonner les troupes françaises qui se trouvent dans une cuvette qui est formée grosso modo par la topographie de Charleroi, Tamines et Auvelais. Et les troupes françaises, avec leurs pantalons rouges, sont assez visibles et deviennent dès lors des cibles faciles pour l'artillerie qui, néanmoins, il faut le mentionner, ne peut pas agir très facilement à cause des terrils présents dans la région. En effet, la région de Charleroi est fortement développée au niveau industriel et ces terrils vont contraindre l'artillerie à devoir évoluer de très près. La journée du 21, donc, les ponts d'Auvelais et de Tamines sont enlevés dans l'après-midi, un peu avant 17 heures. Ensuite, le lendemain, les Français tentent une attaque sur Âmes-sur-Sambre et Fos, pardon. La contre-attaque française des 3e et 10e corps, avec les 37e et 38e divisions d'infanterie coloniale, dont on a parlé tout à l'heure, sur Âmes-sur-Sambre, sont repoussés par les Allemands, qui finissent par, eux, prendre Fos. Les Français tiennent néanmoins le gros du choc et le premier corps est placé sur la Meuse où il est en attente. Là, on a donné l'ordre à 4 heures du matin de pouvoir faire sauter les ponts, mais demeurent encore ceux de Givet, Astières et Dinan. Le lendemain, le 23 août, ce sont des combats qui vont avoir lieu autour de Sars-Saint-Laurent et Saint-Gérard. Les attaques françaises sur Sars-Saint-Laurent et Saint-Gérard, qui sont initialement une bonne idée pour pouvoir repousser les forces allemandes de l'autre côté de la Sambre, vont devoir être interrompues à cause de l'arrivée de la 3e armée de von Hausen du côté de Dinan. Donc c'est aux environs de Hoe et Astières, où les ponts demeurent intacts. Donc, les 3e et 10e corps ont été trop éprouvés au matin, mais le premier corps, lui, était censé pouvoir faire cette attaque sur Sars-Saint-Laurent, pardon, et ces attaques-là ont dû être interrompues, et le premier corps a dû revenir tout en urgence sur la Meuse, les 2 autres corps n'étant employés qu'en défensive. Malgré tout, les Français tiennent relativement bien le choc et parviennent à reculer en bonne et due forme. La majeure partie des pertes infligées aux Français sont dues à leur action offensive plus que défensive. Et effectivement, le véritable problème qui surgit lors de la bataille de Charleroi, c'est l'arrivée de la 3e armée à hauteur de Dinan. Et c'est ça qui va contraindre l'armée française à se replier, et Lanrezac va donner son ordre de repli le 24, car le saillant dans lequel se trouvait son armée était beaucoup trop dangereux. On peut passer. Alors on voit que ces épisodes ont donné lieu à des représentations françaises, parce que ça a fortement marqué l'esprit collectif français. Il faut savoir que le 22 août, c'est la journée, une des pires journées pour l'armée française de toute son histoire. En effet, ils vont perdre 27 000 soldats ce jour-là, et un peintre relativement célèbre, Nestor Router, va peindre cette triste journée du 22 août 1914. Ici, en l'occurrence, c'est en Gaume, dans la région de Virton, mais ça représente bien ce que l'armée française a pu marquer, en tout cas dans l'esprit collectif.
Oui, Nestor Router est un peintre belge ayant vu le résultat des combats.
Donc sur la journée du 22 août, les pertes françaises sont assez élevées, et si on prend pour toute la bataille des frontières, on en arrive à 27 000 soldats, mais ce qui représente grosso modo 7 000 soldats en Gaume, 10 000 sur Charleroi et 10 000 sur l'Alsace et la Lorraine.
Donc pendant que les Français se battent dans la région de Charleroi, les Britanniques, eux, arrivent dans la région de Mons. Vu les combats menés par les Français à Charleroi, ils décident de s'établir sur le canal Mons-Condé, comme je l'ai expliqué. Pendant les journées du 21-22 août, quelques affrontements ont lieu avec des avant-gardes allemandes. Donc les Britanniques lancent des reconnaissances pour savoir exactement quelles unités allemandes ils vont devoir affronter. Et le premier soldat britannique à tomber sur le front occidental meurt le 21 août dans la région de Mons. Le 23 août, les Allemands lancent leur attaque entre Mons sur le corps expéditionnaire britannique. Donc cette attaque va tout d'abord se concentrer le 23 août sur le saillant formé par les villages de Nimy et Aubourg. Donc le 23 août à 8 h du matin, les armées de von Kluck lancent une attaque sur les troupes britanniques retranchées derrière le canal. Ces attaques ont lieu en ordre serré. Donc vers 8 h, 9 h du matin, les troupes allemandes subissent déjà de très lourdes pertes. Elles se replient. En cours de matinée, elles décident de lancer une seconde attaque sur les troupes britanniques disposées le long du canal entre Nimy et Aubourg, cette fois-ci en ordre dispersé. À nouveau, les Britanniques tiennent le choc. Néanmoins, les Allemands, mettant en œuvre leur expérience du combat interarmes, vont amener progressivement des forces d'artillerie à proximité des positions britanniques et vont commencer à pilonner les soldats britanniques retranchés derrière le canal. En ce 23 août, vers midi, la situation commence à devenir critique pour ces troupes disposées derrière le canal entre Nîmes et Aubourg. Elles décident de se replier au sud, dans le sud de Mons. Les Allemands tentent de profiter de l'occasion, notamment en lançant des attaques à l'est de Mons, dans la région du Bois-la-Haut, donc située entre Aubourg et Saint-Guilain. Là, de nouveau, ils sont repoussés par des troupes britanniques judicieusement placées en couverture. Cet épisode va donner lieu donc à des résistances acharnées, à des actes héroïques, donc de la part notamment du sergent Fitzpatrick au carrefour de la bascule. Cette résistance des troupes britanniques et leur capacité à se replier en bon ordre sans être anéanties par les troupes allemandes va donner naissance à la légende des Anges de Mons. Donc, en septembre 1914, un romancier, un nouvelliste, Arthur Machen, va publier dans un journal britannique une nouvelle dans laquelle la retraite de Mons aurait été permise par l'intervention d'anges. Évidemment, il s'agit d'une légende, mais qui va être prise très au sérieux à l'époque. Certains vont la tenir pour vraie. Donc, en cette journée du 23 août, les Allemands pénètrent déjà dans Mons. Ils mènent, outre leur attaque sur le saillant de Nîmes et d'Aubourg, ils attaquent également dans la région de Jemappes, pour s'emparer notamment des ponts défendus par les Britanniques. De nouveau, le scénario qui s'est passé à Nîmes et Aubourg se répète. Donc, les Britanniques repoussent les premiers assauts allemands, menés toujours en formation compacte. Mais de nouveau, les Britanniques doivent céder du terrain sous la pression du nombre. À Jemappes, ils parviennent à faire exploser le pont et bloquer ainsi les Allemands pendant un certain temps. Au soir du 23 août, les Britanniques ont dû se replier du canal, notamment le 2e corps de Smith Dorrien, qui, disposé à droite du dispositif, a subi le gros de l'attaque allemande. Donc, au soir du 23 août, les Britanniques sont disposés sur les hauteurs de Mons, sur les positions allant de Quiévrain et passant par notamment Frameries et Armigny. Le 24 août, les Allemands maintiennent leur pression sur les soldats britanniques qui résistent cette fois-ci dans le Morinage, notamment dans des cités ouvrières. Le 24 août, les Britanniques vont subir plus de pertes. Pourquoi? Parce que leurs unités vont se défendre en ayant tendance à se replier moins rapidement. Ils vont donc concéder davantage de pertes que la veille. Il faut également signaler l'action du 9e lancier à Élouge qui charge les unités allemandes. Le 24 août au soir, French prend la décision de faire replier ses troupes. Il faut savoir que parallèlement, les Français entament également leur retraite.
Exactement.
Donc la retraite qui commence le 24 août se terminera sur la Marne le 5 septembre. Ce qui est remarquable ici, c'est que deux armées, donc le corps expéditionnaire britannique de French et la 5e armée de Lanrezac, parviennent à se replier en bon ordre, après avoir subi des combats d'une violence très élevée. Ils sont aidés en cela par l'état de fatigue des troupes allemandes qui combattent, eux, depuis Liège.
Il faut également mentionner que l'armée belge, à ce moment-là, quitte à peine la position fortifiée de Namur et qu'elle s'échappe par un petit couloir qui est toujours vide de soldats allemands aux environs de Mettey. Et cette armée belge va rejoindre la France afin de pouvoir reprendre le bateau et continuer le combat sur Anvers qui ne tombera qu'au mois d'octobre 1914.
Donc, tout au long de leur retraite jusque la Marne, les Britanniques et les Français vont mener des combats retardateurs contre les Allemands qui les suivent. Il y aura 2 affrontements plus importants à hauteur du Cateau pour les Britanniques, donc qui aura lieu le 25 août, et à hauteur de Guise pour les Français. Lors de ces deux combats, tant français que britanniques concèdent de lourdes pertes, mais parviennent à nouveau à se dégager de l'étreinte allemande.
Donc nous voyons que ces 4 jours de combat sur Charleroi, Mons, ainsi que Dinan et même Arlon-Virton ont impliqué 2 923 000 soldats. Donc c'est vraiment une quantité de troupes qui est énorme, qui a rarement ou jamais été égalée auparavant, et que la longueur du front s'étend sur 300 km en tout cas pour cette portion-là de combat. Au niveau des effectifs, on remarque que la bataille des frontières, dans lesquelles s'inscrivent les batailles de Charleroi et de Mons, ont mobilisé donc tous ces soldats, et que ces forces allemandes représentent une quantité d'hommes qui est relativement similaire si l'on additionne les troupes françaises, britanniques et belges. Donc ici, sur le graphique. C'est un bilan qui est en demi-teinte pour les 3 armées. Donc, la France est tactiquement vaincue car elle doit se replier partout, et la plupart des commandants divisionnaires de la 5e armée ainsi que donc, les corps d'armée et le chef même de la 5e armée, à savoir Lanrezac, sont limogés entre le 25 août et le 5 septembre. Ils tombent effectivement pour ne pas avoir suivi les enseignements de l'offensive à outrance et d'avoir autorisé ou ordonné des replis. Donc, il paye le prix d'une retraite qui, cependant, permet à l'armée française de se rétablir sur de meilleures positions, plus solides, à savoir la position fortifiée de Maubeuge, et évite un anéantissement complet de cette armée-là. L'Allemagne, quant à elle, voit ses 2e et 3e armées triompher, mais elles sont exsangues malgré leur victoire, et les soldats sont véritablement épuisés. Ils ont également derrière eux un sanglant parcours depuis Liège jusque dans le nord de la France, avec des tueries qui sont perpétrées envers les civils, les soldats étant épuisés au niveau physique, mais également au niveau de leurs nerfs. Et si les Allemands sont vainqueurs tactiques, ils ne peuvent néanmoins prétendre à une victoire stratégique complète, puisque la 5e armée française a pu, nous l'avons vu, se rétablir sur d'autres positions. Donc le plan Schlieffen ne peut pas à ce moment-là être véritablement mené à bien.
Donc, par contre, pour les Britanniques, l'affrontement de Mons apparaît comme une véritable victoire. Non seulement ils ont infligé de très lourdes pertes aux troupes allemandes qui les attaquaient, mais en plus ils ont réussi à éviter l'encerclement. De plus, le soldat britannique a, lors de cette bataille, prouvé sa valeur au combat. Néanmoins, le tableau n'est pas tout à fait positif non plus, parce que le corps expéditionnaire britannique a concédé de très lourdes pertes par rapport à sa taille, et ces pertes vont devoir être compensées dans les mois qui suivent, notamment par l'engagement de volontaires moins bien entraînés que ceux qui combattent à Mons. D'ailleurs, l'épuisement du corps expéditionnaire britannique remettra pendant un temps en question la participation britannique à la bataille de la Marne.
Alors ici, comme nous l'avons vu, la plupart des chefs de corps d'armée français sont donc limogés, et il y a un limogeage qui est bien symptomatique de ce qu'on pense dans l'armée française. Par exemple, Lanrezac, lorsqu'il va limoger Sauret, lui dit « tu fais reculer tes troupes devant d'autres troupes inférieures en nombre ». Donc c'est vraiment l'offensive française qui était censée primer et qui ici ne fonctionne pas, et c'est ça qui a créé la déroute au sein des officiers français plus que de la troupe.
Donc on voit également qu'il y a une disproportion des pertes entre les différentes armées engagées lors de ces combats de Mons et Charleroi. Alors que les Britanniques ont des pertes relativement limitées, les Français, eux, enregistrent un taux de perte très élevé, notamment en raison des offensives menées contre les troupes allemandes. Les Allemands, quant à eux, enregistrent également des pertes importantes, tant à Mons qu'à Charleroi. À Mons, ce sera notamment dû aux attaques frontales menées contre les troupes britanniques retranchées derrière le canal Mons-Condé.
C'est la même chose pour les Français d'ailleurs, qui eux vont subir la majorité de leurs pertes dans des actions offensives plus que défensives évidemment.
Donc, ce que nous avons pu remarquer, donc, ce sont des affrontements assez différents. L'adversaire est toujours le même, donc l'armée du Kaiser, mais ces deux affrontements se soldent par des taux de perte et des résultats très différents qu'on peut expliquer par plusieurs facteurs. Donc les grands facteurs que nous avons identifiés pour expliquer ces différents bilans, ils sont multiples. Ici, nous en avons sélectionné 4. Donc, il y a tout d'abord l'équipement, qui nous verrons au final ne joue qu'un rôle mineur dans ces taux de perte différents. Ce qui n'est pas le cas du commandement, qui lui va être responsable en grande partie de ces différences de bilan, ainsi que les tactiques. Enfin, nous verrons également que c'est une différence majeure entre ces deux affrontements est une utilisation différente des obstacles naturels.
En ce qui concerne l'équipement, nous l'avons vu au début de la présentation, les soldats français sont encore équipés un peu à la mode du 19e siècle. C'est également le cas pour l'armée belge. Par contre, ce n'est plus le cas pour l'armée allemande, en tout cas ça l'est beaucoup moins, et ça n'est plus du tout pour l'armée britannique. Mais la différence majeure au niveau de l'équipement, c'est surtout l'artillerie allemande, qui a eu un impact considérable déjà depuis la progression depuis Liège jusqu'à son arrivée à Mons.
Au final, le facteur déterminant qui va déterminer à la fois les pertes et les issues des batailles vont être les tactiques utilisées et les commandements. Donc ici, nous avons identifié 3 niveaux de commandement principaux qui vont avoir des influences différentes sur le terrain. Donc tout d'abord, au niveau des commandements d'armée. Donc les chefs des différentes armées, donc ici on se situe au niveau de French, Lanrezac, Kluck et Bülow, on peut voir que ce niveau de commandement est dépossédé du champ de bataille. Donc, il est peu au courant de ce qui se passe sur le terrain en temps réel et de manière générale, les instructions qu'ils vont donner vont être peu en lien avec ce qui se passe sur le champ de bataille concrètement.
Ce sont un peu comme des joueurs d'échecs qui sont, comme tu l'as dit, dépossédés vraiment de leur champ de bataille.
Il est à noter qu'au niveau de l'Europe occidentale, c'est un petit peu une première, dans la mesure où un siècle précédent, les chefs des armées, comme par exemple le duc de Wellington, étaient sur le terrain et pouvaient voir en temps réel ce qui se passait sur le champ de bataille. Donc c'est une grande différence. Il est à noter que ce niveau de commandement va avoir tout de même une grande importance, notamment au niveau des ordres de retraite. On va voir que French et Lanrezac vont véritablement sauver leurs troupes en donnant des ordres au bon moment. Un deuxième niveau de commandement qui est important, c'est le niveau de division ou de corps. Donc là, on se situe plutôt au niveau de Smith Dorrien, par exemple, côté britannique, qui prend réellement les décisions en temps réel sur le champ de bataille, notamment en ce qui concerne les actions défensives ou offensives. Comme Ben l'a expliqué, les commandants de division françaises vont parfois prendre des initiatives désastreuses, notamment lors des attaques du 23 août. Ces décisions, qui vont à contre-courant de ce que Lanrezac avait décidé, vont avoir des conséquences au niveau des pertes. Il est également à noter que les généraux divisionnaires, enfin plutôt de corps ici, britanniques, comme Smith Dorrien par exemple, ont déjà une expérience du feu et du stress du combat, notamment de par les combats qu'ils ont menés dans la guerre des bourgs. Ce sera moins le cas côté français, où certains généraux vont perdre les pédales. Certains témoignages accusent notamment les généraux Bloch et Verrier d'avoir complètement perdu pied au cours du combat. Au-delà de ces deux niveaux de commandement, il y a un type de commandement plus local qu'on voit sur le champ de bataille et qui va avoir une influence. Ce sont les décisions prises par des officiers subalternes ou par des sous-officiers. Lors de la bataille de Mons, certaines actions, donc notamment la défense du pont-rail de Nimy par le lieutenant Días, ainsi que la défense du carrefour de la Bascule par le sergent Fitzpatrick, vont avoir une influence sur la bataille en bloquant les troupes allemandes. Il est intéressant de voir que tant du côté allemand que du côté, et surtout du côté britannique, des sous-officiers et des officiers subalternes vont prendre des décisions et prendre des initiatives sans en avoir reçu l'ordre de la part de leurs supérieurs.
Mais évidemment pas le cas dans l'armée française, où les sous-officiers et officiers subalternes jouent plus le rôle de berger ou de serre-fil que de véritablement de meneur, de preneur d'initiative en tout cas.
Ouais, donc voilà, l'encadrement de la troupe est très différent côté britannique que côté français. Comme on l'a dit, un troisième facteur, c'est l'utilisation des obstacles naturels par les différents belligérants. Donc les Britanniques, eux, vont s'accrocher derrière le canal Mons-Condé, qui, comme je l'ai déjà expliqué, bien qu'étant franchissable, ça va d'ailleurs être à nouveau le cas lors des combats de septembre 1944, exactement sur le même canal, constitue le seul obstacle naturel de la région. Donc ils vont l'exploiter au mieux pour construire leur système défensif. Idem, le second jour de la bataille de Mons, les soldats britanniques vont s'accrocher au mieux aux positions offertes par les villages miniers du Borinage. Côté français, en revanche, alors que l'armée française dispose d'un avantage tactique à Charleroi en contrôlant les hauteurs de la Meuse, cet avantage tactique va être tout à fait perdu de par les assauts lancés contre les Allemands qui sont retranchés en contrebas. Donc, on voit ici que les Français font un moins bon usage du champ de bataille que les Britanniques, de manière générale. Il faut également noter sur le champ de bataille que les Allemands, eux, vont plutôt se distinguer par une maîtrise supérieure du combat interarmes que leurs homologues français et britanniques, notamment par l'emploi de l'artillerie à des distances relativement proches de la ligne de front, notamment lors des combats autour du canal entre Aubourg et Nîmes. C'est l'artillerie allemande qui va finalement remporter la décision en pilonnant les troupes britanniques.
Et alors, il y a eu aussi un impact considérable de ces deux batailles sur la population civile belge. Donc, comme on l'a déjà dit, les unités allemandes vont égrener leur passage à travers la Belgique de tueries de masse. Ici, en l'occurrence, sur la diapositive, on peut voir ce qui s'est produit à Spontin. Mais dans le cadre de la bataille de Charleroi et de Mons, il y a également eu des tueries. En fait, cette guerre brutale est due à une conjonction de plusieurs facteurs qui va transposer une idée préconçue dans le réel et aboutir à ces atrocités allemandes sur les civils. Là, on doit citer le travail de John Horn et Alan Kramer, par exemple, les atrocités allemandes qui a été réalisé en 2014 et qui fait une bonne synthèse de tout ce qui s'est produit en Belgique et dans le nord de la France à ce moment-là à l'encontre des populations civiles. Donc, cette idée préconçue des francs-tireurs, c'est-à-dire de la population belge civile qui va aider les Français et en l'occurrence les Britanniques également dans leur guerre, est née du souvenir de la guerre franco-prussienne en 1870, durant laquelle certains citoyens français ont pris leurs armes et ont tiré sur les troupes prussiennes. De même, les troupes allemandes amalgament la garde civique avec des civils, alors qu'en réalité, la garde civique belge est une garde bourgeoise de maintien de l'ordre qu'on pourrait grosso modo comparer actuellement à la gendarmerie. L'armée allemande est surprise face à la résistance de l'armée belge depuis Liège et également dans la position fortifiée de Namur, et cette résistance belge va fortement énerver les troupes allemandes, qui sont soumises à la fatigue, au stress et également à l'ivresse, étant donné que de nombreux soldats se livrent à des pillages, ce qui va entraîner des tirs fratricides ou autres qui vont eux-mêmes donner libre cours à des tueries de masse. Les officiers de l'armée allemande vont soit fermer les yeux sur ce type d'exaction ou même y participer. Parfois même, certains avis vont être mal interprétés. Donc, par exemple, on va dire à la population de laisser ses armes et ça va être compris par les troupes allemandes comme étant justement une demande de la population, à la population belge de prendre les armes. Et alors, il y a également la topographie qui va jouer là-dessus. Par exemple, dans la vallée de la Meuse, le son des coups de feu va se répercuter sur les rochers et cet écho va donner à croire aux Allemands que ce sont des tirs de francs-tireurs. Dans la région de Charleroi, Tamines, Auvelais, il y a de nombreuses tueries, notamment à Tamines par exemple, où 383 civils sont massacrés le 22 août. De même, le lendemain, il y a également des tueries dans les environs de Genappe, Nimy et Coirnion. Et ces tueries ne prendront fin que le 6 septembre dans le nord de la France. Alors, à Charleroi, en tout cas, une partie des explications peut être donnée parce que les civils ont effectivement accueilli les Français au cri de « Vive la Belgique et vive la France !» et que les soldats français qui se battent dans la région de Tamines, Charleroi, Auvelais, utilisent des tactiques de harcèlement lors de la défense des ponts. Ils ont construit des barricades, il y a quelques tranchées, ils font des tirs en enfilade depuis les maisons, et tout cela déstabilise un petit peu les Allemands qui n'imaginaient pas une réaction telle de la part des soldats français, et également des gardes civiques belges, il y en avait encore quelques-uns dans Charleroi, qui résistent plus que prévu. Nous l'avons déjà vu, l'ivresse de certains soldats. Donc, par exemple, le 78e régiment d'infanterie de réserve boit plus de vin que d'eau du côté de Verzé. Et alors, un autre facteur à mettre en exergue, c'est aussi les différences de religion, étant donné que certains régiments allemands, même la majorité de l'armée allemande, est protestante, tandis que la Belgique est catholique. Et en 1914, ça a une grande importance et ça va jouer quand même fortement dans les atrocités allemandes qui vont être perpétrées. Maintenant, on va pouvoir passer donc à la mémoire des deux batailles et les souvenirs qui sont relativement divergents.
Voilà. Donc, une grande différence entre la bataille de Mons et la bataille de Charleroi sera leur mémoire. En effet, on est sur deux souvenirs assez différents. Donc, après la bataille de Charleroi, les Français décédés vont être enterrés au cimetière de Charleroi-Nord et de Belmotte. Et à l'heure actuelle, il n'existe que très peu de monuments en fait, autour de cette bataille de Charleroi. La plupart du temps, ces monuments sont des initiatives privées, à l'exception du monument aux armées françaises érigé dans les années 90 à Charleroi. Donc voilà, la raison pourquoi un déficit mémoriel au niveau de la bataille de Charleroi, c'est tout simplement parce qu'il ne s'agit pas d'une victoire. Pour être français, c'est une défaite plutôt cuisante. Et pour la région de Charleroi, il s'agit d'un événement qui marque le début d'une occupation allemande qui va être extrêmement sévère. Donc voilà, ça ne veut pas dire qu'il n'y a aucune action du côté de Charleroi pour commémorer cette bataille, que du contraire. Mais toutefois, on observe une grande différence avec Mons. Donc à Mons, là, les victimes britanniques vont être enterrées dans différents cimetières de la région, conformément à la tradition de l'armée britannique à ce niveau. Il faut noter l'existence du cimetière militaire de Saint-Symphorien, qui va être érigé par les Allemands et inauguré en 1917. Donc dans ce cimetière, c'est un cimetière binational, ce qui est assez unique pour l'époque. Pourquoi est-il binational? C'est parce que le propriétaire belge du terrain a exigé des Allemands qu'ils enterrent également les victimes britanniques avec les mêmes honneurs que leurs hommes. Donc, la bataille de Mons est vue en Grande-Bretagne comme en Belgique comme une victoire des troupes britanniques. La ville de Mons y voit également une opportunité touristique, les touristes britanniques étant très attentifs à la mémoire de leur pays. D'ailleurs, une bonne partie de l'exposition du Mons Memorial Museum explique cette bataille de Mons, et la fréquentation de ce musée est essentiellement...
Et est-ce que cela a mené à empêcher l'enveloppement des forces françaises comme c'était envisagé dans le plan Schlieffen? On peut dire que oui, dans un certain sens, l'ordre de Lanrezac sauve la 5e armée française, ça c'est certain, et lui permet de conserver des lignes de défense relativement proches de la frontière belge, mais l'armée française aurait tout de même pu combler la perte de cette 5e armée si cela s'était produit. Elle aurait bien entendu reculer sa ligne de front, néanmoins, le réservoir de la population française, entre guillemets, aurait pu combler justement toutes ces pertes qui auraient été subies lors de cette bataille-là.
Un élément important aussi à tenir en compte dans cette série de prises de décision, c'est le fait que le plan Schlieffen Moltke est bien trop ambitieux. En fait, il ne tient pas compte du facteur temps ni de l'état d'épuisement des soldats qui en réalité ne sont plus capables physiquement de poursuivre les troupes françaises.
D'ailleurs, dans son Denkschrift de 1905, Schlieffen ne mentionne pas de temporalité. Or, un rythme soutenu des opérations était quand même nécessaire pour pouvoir le mener à bien.
Il faut savoir qu'à l'époque, donc, les soldats n'ont pas de camion pour se déplacer. La plupart évoluent à pied, mis à part la cavalerie, évidemment. En août 1914, il fait très chaud. Ils sont tous avec des bardas dépassant la vingtaine de kilos pour la plupart, ainsi qu'avec des vêtements de laine. Physiquement, pour l'avoir déjà fait, marcher avec un barda sous le soleil, en 2-3 jours, on est épuisé.
D'autant que si on prend l'exemple de l'armée belge, dans les règlements d'infanterie, il est spécifié que les soldats ne peuvent pas abandonner leurs vêtements en laine par peur justement de perdre du matériel et par conséquent, ils sont obligés de combattre avec des tenues qui sont trop chaudes pour la période.
Ensuite, pour terminer, nous allons répondre à la dernière question, voir si la bataille de Mons peut être d'une part considérée comme le premier engagement du British Expeditionary Force sur le front de l'Ouest. Donc là, évidemment, oui, à grande échelle. Il faut savoir que avant la bataille de Mons, il y a déjà quelques affrontements, notamment entre les avant-gardes de cette force britannique et les Allemands. Comme j'avais expliqué, le premier soldat britannique a tombé en Europe sur le front ouest européen et le soldat part tombé le 21 août 1914. Pour la deuxième partie de la question, donc à savoir si les Français auraient pu se maintenir dans les Ardennes et en Lorraine, est-ce qu'on aurait pu éviter la défaite et ainsi la bataille de la Marne? Il faut savoir qu'un facteur déterminant pour répondre à cette question, bon, tout d'abord, on ne peut pas refaire l'histoire,
Bien entendu.
mais un facteur déterminant est le corps expéditionnaire britannique. Il a bien tenu à Mons, mais il est à fort à parier qu'il n'aurait pas pu subir un effort prolongé, notamment en raison de ses effectifs limités, donc qui sont de 6 divisions d'infanterie et une de cavalerie. Donc, on peut supposer légitimement que si ça n'avait pas été les Français qui avaient été obligés de se replier de la région de Charleroi, ce sont les Britanniques qui auraient été obligés de se replier en raison de la pression allemande. Donc voilà, pour maintenir une ligne de front continue, les Français auraient dû se replier à leur tour. Donc voilà, nous vous remercions pour
de votre
attention. Et on va trouver des questions.
N'hésitez pas à nous les envoyer.
So excellent answer, Ben and Pierre. I think it was a pleasure to have you at the event, and thank you very much for providing such a great, really great presentation to the public.
With pleasure.
With pleasure.
Thank you very much. So I would like to give the floor to David to give a brief summary of what we've seen in the presentation. David, ¿qué te parece si te cedo la palabra para hacer un breve resumen de lo que vimos en la presentación con Ben y con Pierre?
Muchas gracias, Laura. Sí, para hacer un breve análisis de lo que hemos visto en esta excelente ponencia. Ante todo, agradecer a Pierre Miller y Vencedores, pertenecientes al World Heritage Institute de Bélgica, su participación en este seminario sobre la Primera Guerra Mundial y, desde luego, felicitarles por su magnífica ponencia sobre Mons y Charleroi, un estudio comparativo de los enfrentamientos en agosto de 1914. Hay que recordar que la Primera Guerra Mundial y, en particular, la supuesta primera batalla del Marne aún son relevantes hoy en día en las operaciones militares. Hay muchas lecciones que el militar profesional moderno y el historiador pueden sacar de los primeros 6 meses de la guerra, que fue librada principalmente entre las fuerzas alemanas y las de los aliados franceses, británicos y las fuerzas belgas. La primera campaña del Marne fue extraordinaria y paradójica, ya que fue una derrota estratégica para Alemania en una situación donde ganaron casi todos los enfrentamientos tácticos. Analizar cómo esto ocurrió pues ofrece perspectivas claves que hoy en día son muy relevantes a nuestras Fuerzas Armadas a nivel en Europa, especialmente en cómo son pertinentes el análisis y el uso del concepto de mando tipo misión. En esa primera campaña del Marne se darían las conocidas como batallas de las fronteras, las batallas claves que fueron Charleroi y Mons, como nos han explicado y detallado tan magníficamente Pierre y Ben. Seguidamente se produjo esa retirada general aliada que muy bien nos han detallado, dando como resultado más enfrentamientos como la batalla de Le Cateau, el asedio de Montbard, Wabash y la batalla de San Quintín. Y con ello pues ponemos fin a este pequeño análisis y breve resumen de esa excelente ponencia que nos han dado Ben y Pierre. Merci beaucoup Pierre, Ben, pour vos excellentes présentations.
Gracias.
Gracias.
So, to continue, let's introduce our next speaker, Major Dave Warner. He obtained a master's degree in history at the Went University in 1999. In 2002, he joined the Belgian Army. After his officer training, he became a platoon commander with the Armand Reconnaissance troops of the 1st Regiment Jaggers, the part of the Leopoldburg, with which he carried out of the NATO operation in Kosovo. He currently working on his PhD of the battlefield performance of the Belgian army during the 18-day campaign in May 1940. So let's welcome Major Dave. It's so happy to hear you today. And thank you very much for joining us today in this event. The audience is all yours to begin your presentation.
It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you for having me. My speech will be about the Belgian army during the First World War, which is literally a very tiny army in a very large conflict. I've roughly divided my speech or my project in 5 important parts. First of all, a little bit of an explanation of the Belgian army just before the First World War broke out. Then how did the Belgian army perform its different operations after the Germans attacked in August 1914. After the stopping of the Germans, the Belgian army went through an entire evolution towards the end of the war, and that new Belgian army also took part in the final offensive together with the Allies. And as a small conclusion and a bit of space for questions and answers if you have any. Like already said, I'm a Major Dave Warnier. I work at the Royal Military Academy of Belgium in Brussels, where I work as a military assistant in the Department of Conflict Studies in the history chair of that department. Before we tackle the actual operations of 1914, I have to explain a little bit about the Belgian army before the First World War. When the First World War broke out, the Belgian army was completely unprepared for that war. Belgium was a neutral country, as dictated by the 24 articles in its independence in officially 1839. But it didn't have too much of investment in its defense forces since that time. There's 2 problems with the Belgian army. First of all, it's way too small. It's tiny compared to its neighbors, France and Germany, and being between those 2 large countries, obviously that's a problem. Not only that, because of the lack of investment, it's very poorly equipped with material akin to 1850, and the training is also not adapted to the modern age of warfare. Also 19th century tactics in a 20th century war. As far as the size is concerned, most of the politicians and political parties in the 19th century thought it was an unwise investment, the army. The Catholics thought it was a waste because they thought the recruits only learned drinking and other vices in the army. The socialists thought that the army and the special they were peace-loving crew, and also the way in which the army was organized in that time, they thought it was totally undemocratic. And the third large party, the Liberals, they thought it was investing in the army was just economically not interesting. If the Belgian army just prior to the First World War did not, was still a little bit better than it could have been, that's only to thank our King Leopold II. He's known for many bad things, notably in the Belgian Congo, but also in his personal love life. But as far as the army is concerned, he was the only one who always believed that Belgium had to have a stronger army, and that an army was important to defend that Belgian neutrality. While the political party thought, okay, the fact that we're neutral is a guarantee in itself, which clearly wasn't the case in 1914. The size of the Belgian army, well, technically speaking, the Belgian army was made of volunteers, but the Belgian army was so unpopular that those volunteers almost never came. And the plan was, okay, you have a bunch of volunteers, and then you add a couple of other methods of recruiting to get your annual numbers. Until 1909, the method of recruitment was just drawing lots. You needed 100 soldiers, let's just say, in a village. Okay, 100. You had a list of all the age-appropriate young men who drew lots, and if you had number 1 until 100, you were in bad luck and you had to perform your military service. But there was a kind of escape from that. Somebody had to do service. It was not personal. So if you wanted to, you had a lot of money, you could pay somebody else to do your military service for you. There were also a system with that other firms paid somebody to do the service for you. So this is one of the reasons why the socialists thought the system was unfair, because it allowed richer people to escape their military service. Leopold II continued to fight for a personal general military service that every son of the family had to perform. It didn't work out as he wanted, but there came a kind of intermediate solution. And so finally, there was a military service that one person or one son per family had to perform. And there was absolutely no way out of that, except maybe when you're physically unfit or some of those things. That meant that from the drawing of lots, you went from an annual soldiers of 13,000 roughly to 20,000 per year. So that was already a bit better. Leopold II was such an advocate of that system that he was actually on his deathbed in December 1999 when he signed it. He asked his personal physicians to keep him alive until he could sign that bill. He signed the bill, and the next day he came into a coma, and 2 days later he was dead. So for him, it was very, very important. In 1913, finally, because of all the troubles that had been going around and the fact that a war seemed inevitable, or at least was looming, a general military service in which all age-appropriate men would have to perform their military service was installed. But unfortunately, because of those 3 different systems that were in order, it would take until somewhere in the 1920s before that full effect would take place. So when in 1914 the First World War came along, that was still not the case. And so as a result, instead of the 360,000 that you should have had with a general military service, we now only had 117,000 younger men in the field army, and the older recruits were fighting in the fortress troops. So they were manning the forts. Forts, the ones in Antwerp, Liège, Namur, also mainly built under pressure of Leopold II. Belgian army was still equipped like it was in the, well, roughly 1850s. As you can see, they had woolen uniforms, absolutely not adapted to the August heat of 1914, in various beautiful colors, very beautiful for a parade, but not really practical when in actual battle. Also, they had only 120 machine guns from the entire army, and those were, for example, pulled by dogs. Those dogs, or the fact that dogs pulled their machine guns, was considered, even with the standard of 1914, exotic by most European other countries. Training, well, if you have lacking equipment, the training is usually based around that equipment, so that training was also going back to the tactics of the 1850s and 1860s. The organization of the Belgian army, officially King Albert I was the head of the Belgian army. The Belgian army was roughly divided into a general HQ, so the HQ of the army, and then 6 army divisions. An army division is a little bit different from a normal infantry division. It's larger, generally speaking, and so army divisions in the Belgian army went from anywhere between 16,000 and 24,000 men, depending a bit on the composition. We had 6 army divisions and then a cavalry division, a very small one, maximum 4,000 men in total. Each army division was divided into 3 or 4 mixed brigades, and then additionally a unit of cavalry and a unit of artillery, roughly speaking. Those mixed brigades were composed of 2 infantry units, 1 company of machine guns, and 1 battalion of artillery. So as far as artillery and machine guns is concerned, really poorly equipped. Each battalion, for example, could count on 3 pieces of 75mm artillery to support them, which was not a lot. This is the state of the Belgian army when Belgium was attacked in August 1914, and so it did not bode well. The importance of Belgium for the German attack plan. The German attack plan called Schlieffen, and then adapted by the chief of staff in 1914, the General Moltke. The plan was actually, they considered Russia to be the most dangerous opponent, but it would take Russia a lot of time to mobilize its forces, at least 6 weeks. And so in a first attempt, they would try to invade France and crush the French army, and then deplace their troops towards Russia. Because the French and German border was heavily fortified, the Germans took on the idea of going through neutral terrain, which is Luxembourg, Belgium, and according to Schlieffen, also the Netherlands. But von Moltke adapted his plan and left the Netherlands alone. But as a result, that the city of Liège and its fortresses in 1914 in Belgium became more and more important for the German army. The Belgian army did perform a number of larger and also smaller battles in 1914, beginning with the most important one, the Battle of Liège. This is the most important one for the Germans because it's blocking their advance, the advance of their main efforts towards France. Liège is a heavily fortified city, 12 fortresses, and they would have to overcome Liège first. A small engagement or smaller engagement near Halen a couple of days later. Then finally the Belgian field army will be swept away in the area of Tirlemont. Germans will also attack the fortress city of Namur, Antwerp, and finally the Belgian army will retreat until it can go no further behind the Iser River, where it will stand its ground to the end. As far as Liège is concerned, Liège is a fortified city. It was fortified in the 1880s, 1890s, roughly speaking. It was important for the Germans. They had to get through Liège as fast as possible, neutralize the fortresses, and so their main effort could continue as fast as possible towards France. The idea behind the attack on Liège was they had a specialty siege group with 6 brigades in that, and during that attack of Liège, they performed a night attack, which at the beginning of the First World War and mainly throughout the First World War was never an excellent idea. Couple that with the fact that all the fortresses of Liège were equipped with a kind of a very heavy spotlight that could see for 4 kilometers almost, and it was an absolute wholesale slaughter for the majority of the German troops. One of the brigades finally actually managed to get through between 2 fortresses and get from the 14th Brigade, went from Réthine to Jupille and arrived at the plateau of Belle-Flamme. Here you have here. From the inside of the fortress ring, they actually fired upon all the fortresses one by one, but it wasn't going fast enough. So instead of having their normal heavy artillery, the Germans called in super heavy artillery, 42 centimeter Big Berthas, for example, and then they succeeded in subduing the forts one by one. The fortresses were not alone. They were being defended by one of the army divisions as well. But the moment that the Germans reached the plateau of Belle-Flamme, the defender of Liège, the General Leman, asked or ordered his 3rd Army Division to join the field army in a more central position. Finally, the fortresses of Liège, the last fortresses, surrendered on the 16th of August, which meant that it took the Germans 12 days to get through the fortress ring of Liège. Depending on who you ask, time loss is, some people claim it's 12 days, which obviously is not, can't be the case, because it takes time to get your troops moving through an area as well. But roughly they at least lost 4 days, more than their schedule would allow, in trying to get through to Liège. This is the result of what happens when a 42 centimeter of a Big Bertha hits your powder room, in this case of the fortress of Lausanne. It was the 3rd largest, well, it's one of the larger fortresses of Liège. And it exploded, and the 2 last fortresses of Liège then were invited, or the commanding officers were invited to have a look, and then they surrendered the next day. And now the German army, or the bulk of the German army, could advance through Belgium and get on with their main effort. Another but smaller battle was the Battle of Halen. Halen is in this area here. The main bulk of the Belgian army, or the Belgian field army, was located between the Dale and the Get rivers. Whilst at that moment in time, the 12th of August, the Germans were still very occupied in the region of Liège. Their cavalry divisions, who had to perform scouting missions and reconnaissance, were already touching and looking where the weak spots of the Belgian army were. They tried at Halen to get over the jet and the bridges, but the German cavalry divisions were finally stopped by the Belgian cavalry division, and part of the 4th mixed brigade. Although heavily outnumbered and outgunned, they still held their ground, obviously because of the fact that the Germans were mainly scouting and doing reconnaissance. They didn't really push that hard because they needed to wait until Liège had fallen, until the bulk of the German army would join up with them. So the victory is somewhat limited, but it's important for the Belgians because it's the only time that we've been able to stop the Germans without any exterior help. And so this is also the reason why it still lives on in Belgian military history. Those are actual pictures of Halen, both the infantry of the 4th Mixed Division that marches towards Halen, and the casualties of the horses, dead horses on the plains of Halen. Once Liège had fallen, the bulk of the German army joined up with the cavalry divisions, and they decided to attack the Belgian land or field army in its position. They attacked it at the center, at the area of Tirlemont, which was held by the 1st Army Division. The attack was very brutal. The Belgian army had, it's the first time that they encountered a full-out German assault with infantry supported by artillery, all the works. And so the 1st Army Division, who was under huge stress, and also the fact that they the artillery didn't really collaborate with the infantry, meant that the 1st Division was swept aside, with as a result that there's a hole in the Belgian lines, and as a result the Belgian HQ decided to retreat in several steps to Leuven, Malines, and finally towards Antwerp, where they would hope to sit out the rest of the war, or at least until the British and the French came to aid. You can see by the pictures the Belgian defense in Augustus 1914, though spirited and with a good morale. Okay, it didn't really stand a chance due to lack of training, proper equipment, manpower against that German juggernaut that rolled over Belgium in the summer of 1914. Now, after the Belgians had retreated towards Antwerp, the next target was Namur, but since that was not on the direct route from the main effort from the Germans, it was less important, and so the Germans completely surrounded the fortress ring of Namur with its 12 forts, and then systematically took out one by one a different force. Part of the 4th Army Division that was located there just barely escaped towards the south and joined up with the French forces who were also in nearing that region. For the destruction of the forts, or the subduing the forts in Namur, the Germans also had now 305mm Skoda artillery, which was funny because, peculiar because they belonged to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and at that moment in time there was still not an official war between Belgium and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The Belgian army retreated in relatively good order to Antwerp. The role of Antwerp was actually what I call a réduit national, a national bulwark. The reasoning is, okay, you have Antwerp, you have 2 fortress rings around Antwerp, you get the field army between those fortresses, and then you wait until the guarantors of the neutrality come to aid. That was also part of the Treaty of 1839, that the Belgian neutrality not only had to be defended by Belgium itself, but it was also guaranteed by the large nations of the time, amongst which the French and the British. And so King Albert I and his army would flee to Antwerp, hold out as long as possible until the British and the French came to our help there. Little problem. Antwerp is located on the Scheldt River, and there's a large port as well, so that's ideal to get help in. But unfortunately, as you can see, the Scheldt crosses into the Netherlands, who were neutral at that time, and so they couldn't let the French or British ships with help pass. During the Battle of the Marne in September 1914, the French asked for help from the Belgians, and we did the only thing that we could do, which is a smaller scale sorties in the flank of the German army. Didn't help very much, but the Germans were really irritated by that, and once the Battle of the Marne had ended and the German advance had been stopped by the French and the British, the Germans sent an additional siege group to take Antwerp by force. And so they attacked Antwerp between the Dil River and the Neet River on those fortresses, and the Belgian army had nowhere left to go but to retreat. And the only way they could retreat was towards the coastline. It wasn't seen in any of the plans. The plans also always said, okay, stick to Antwerp and wait until help arrives, but there was actually no plan B in the plan. And so the Belgians, who had destroyed most of the bridges to be able to withstand a German attack, now suddenly had to build pontoon bridges to escape themselves towards the Belgian coastline. Finally, the German army would be stopped in the legendary Iser River, well, legendary for Belgium in any way. First of all, did the Belgian army take up position behind the Iser River. That was very soon pierced by the Germans. They attacked here in the bend of Tervate. Not only is it a bend or a salient towards the enemy, so it's vulnerable from 3 sides. Also, here lay the division between the 4th and the 1st Army Division, so it was a weak point in the Belgian dispositive as well. The Germans broke through, counterattacks didn't help, and so the Belgians retreated behind the railway line between Nieuwpoort and Dixmude. There, they plugged up all the holes under the railway line. They built a wall of sandbags, and finally they led they inundated the plain with the water of this canal that you see here. So the Belgian army was just saved because the moment that the inundations happened, at the very end of October 1914, the first German troops had already broken through the Belgian dispositif in the area of Ramskapelle, but suddenly they looked behind them, saw the water rising. They thought it was by accident that the artillery had destroyed the irrigation works and stuff like that. And so they retreated behind the Isar River. Not only were we saved by the inundation, we also had a lot of exterior help. French troops defended Dixmude, and the British Navy shelled with their naval cannons the area of Nieuwpoort. Also the fact that the Germans, every time, for example, after the victory at Tervate, they stopped for a couple of days to get their act back together, and by the time they started again, they had already the Belgians had already organized themselves and the inundations. Also, the quality of the Belgian troops that were there were not the same good quality that German troops on the main effort had. So there were already reserve troops or even reserve of the reserve. And those things combined finally saved the Belgian army, who was hanging on by a thread at that moment in time. Once the Belgian army saved and protected by the inundation, which stopped the Germans from any major large-scale operations. What happened in the meantime is only been recently researched in the Belgian historiography. Usually it's like a hibernation, but that's for later. Once behind the Isar River, we stay there until September 1918, and then it's important to know a little bit about the grand strategy of King Albert the First. King Albert, his plan is very simple. We stay actually neutral, even when there's a war going on, but we only do the things that are necessary to liberate Belgium and to restore it in its state like it was in before August 1914. That's also the reason why he continued a defensive military strategy until the very end, which frustrated the French and the British, who continued to ask, okay, participate in offensives, but Belgian army being not equipped, tiny, they just could not afford the losses that the French and the British had during their large-scale offensive operations. Sometimes he did concessions because he also realized from a political point of view, if we do nothing and just leave the French and the British to fight for us, okay, this is going to come back as a after the war, and maybe they will take away the Belgian Congo, for example, and give it or divide it between themselves or stuff like that. So from a political point of view, he was realistic, and he knew he had to participate sometimes. And so they organized minor raids and attacks during large-scale Allied offensive somewhere else on the front to get some German reinforcements towards the Belgian front lines. Also, when the British, for example, had to perform their actions at the Somme, okay, the Belgians took over part of the British front line in the Wipers, north of Wipers and stuff like that. Despite being essentially defensive, the military strategy, they still modernized the forces, gave them new equipment, new training that was also appropriate for attacks, and that would be important for the final Allied offensive in September, beginning in September 1918. Later on, the offensive military strategy would, from August 1918, actually September 1918, to November 1918. Sorry, that's a mistake. While the Belgian army is behind the Iser River, the traditional historiography says that there's a kind of standstill. A Belgian army goes into hibernation and suddenly wakes up in September 1918 to take part in the Allied offensive. But that's obviously not the case. Just like any other army, the Belgian army is evolving through a bloody learning curve. And we see evolution on organization, tactical aspects, both on the defensive and offensive part. That being said, we usually lag 1 year behind those innovations by the French and the British, partly because, okay, the French and the British want to use the new technologies and stuff for themselves first before giving it to somebody else, but also because King Albert was a bit hesitant, and he could use the argument then, okay, our army is still not modernly equipped, so we can't take part in that offensive that you're proposing. So it was a bit on purpose as well. The evolution of the Belgian army has 4 key elements, being a collaboration between different parts of the army, specialization, individualization, and technological progress. As far as collaboration is concerned, that was on all levels, from the very lowest. Even platoons and company learned to work together with, for example, artillery and even air force. And also between all weapons. Well, in August 1914, there was very little or any collaboration at all between artillery, for example, who did their own thing, and infantry who did their own thing. Over the time, by 1918, they had really learned to work together. Communication was a lot better, and that made the Belgian army well, up to par with their colleagues of the French and British forces. A lot of specialty teams were added because you had a lot of new technology. For example, the trench mortars. This one is a typical Belgian one, the Van Beuren one. But also teams of light machine guns, the Chauchas. Everybody knew how to throw a grenade, but the grenadiers were the only one, for example, in the Belgian army who were specifically trained for cleaning out in a tactical way enemy trenches with grenades. You had sharpshooters who would come to the front and more. In the Belgian army in 1914, okay, a soldier had a gun, he was ordered what to do, and that was pretty much it. A soldier in 1918, everybody has to think along, everybody has to be aware of his surroundings. He's not just, he's a part of a larger part of, but he still has a lot of individual freedom, especially at lower echelons up till level platoon and stuff like that. So a lot of tactical operations are performed by lower levels of units, platoons, or attack groups, as they have been called. Also, in 1914, maps were only had by officers, same thing as binoculars. And by the end of the war, everybody got to read a map. Everybody was allowed to use binoculars, and so on. Technological progress. A lot of wireless technology had been implicated, most notably, obviously, the communication technology, which rendered stuff a lot, communication a lot more secure in that respect, that you couldn't shoot your wires of your telephones, so you continue to have communication. Obviously, because it's wireless, the enemy might intercept it, which was a different problem. They also adapted a lot of new weapons. That being said, many of the new weapons were actually not new at all. They existed in 1914, but they were improved, adapted, made lighter, so anybody could use it, gave them into a lot more different teams and units. One of the most known for the Belgian army is the light machine gun teams of the Chauchat machine gun that you see here. Instead of that heavy Maxim that weighs 70 kilos, had to be carried around with larger teams. That evolution was gathered through a lot of different aspects. Some of them were ordered by the High Command. Some of them were invented at their own initiative from the Belgian platoons and higher up, and then said, okay, we've tried this works pretty well, and then they looked at it and sometimes implemented it if they were in agreement. Also, those technologies, tactics, they had been implemented first in small-scale raids, squad, later on platoon, and by the end of the war, that were beginning to get raids, battalion size, with heavy artillery fire support and stuff like that. Those were performed with special artillery units, special attack units called patrouilleurs. And at the end of the war, before the final offensive, what happened is those units were disbanded. The people from those units were dispersed all over the Belgian army, and they had to train their new trainers. And then the whole of the Belgian army did those or had those qualifications, although they didn't have, obviously, not the experience of an actual patrouilleur. In the final offensive, the Belgian army was part of Army Group Flanders. Technically speaking, it was Albert I, our king, who was still in charge, but because of the lack of offensive experience, he was the actual performance was done by the French General de Goutte, which you see here. Belgian army was also reorganized, so the army division still existed, but instead of having mixed brigades, 3 to 4, they went for 2 infantry divisions per army division, which made them, as far as organization goes, roughly the same as, for example, the French army. The Army Group Flanders consisted for the majority of Belgian divisions, but also French and British divisions. To give an idea of what the army of September 1918 looked like, if you look alone at the number of machine guns, that's staggering compared to what August 1914 had, and also the number of artillery. Now we have heavy artillery, now we have specialty trench mortars. If you look at the number of men, okay, we only have 140,000 combat troops, which is a bit more than in August 1914, but you have to take into account Belgium has been occupied for 95% of its territory, so getting additional troops is very, very difficult. The Belgian army attacked on the left flank, the British on the right flank, and the French troops were in reserve directly behind the Belgian army. So probably the French didn't have that much faith on the Belgian capacities of mounting an offensive. But that being said, despite the heavy losses they took during the first phase of the offensive, they took the heavily fortified position of Houtholst Forest and finally were stopped just shy of the next German defensive line. This is pretty much the maximum that the Belgians could reach. The plan was actually to take the crest around Wipers that was from Klerken, Staden, Westerose, Beke, Passendal, this part. So they actually surpassed that crest in the first phase. But when the Belgian army arrived here, it was pretty much spent. The second and third phases, the Belgian army went on the flank to protect the French who had taken over, and the British, because there were still a lot of German troops on the coast. The attack continued until the 11th of November 1980, and until the German troops finally surrendered. But they still in Belgium and not in Germany like in 1945. Belgian army in 1918 has absolutely no resemblance anymore with the Belgian army of 1914. It suffices to look at an ordinary infantry soldier of 1914 and one in 1918. It's still way too small, but that was because of the conditions, because of the fact that Belgium had been overrun. And not only did the equipment change drastically during those 4 years, also the organization with division in infantry divisions and army divisions, and also and especially the tactics had changed a lot, with a lot of emphasis on the individuality of the infantrymen, who were now largely equipped with light machine guns, had artillery support to back them up, fought in fire and movement. And so there's absolutely night and day difference between the Belgian army in 1914 and the one in 1918, finally. I hope it has been an informative meeting. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I will try to answer them to the best of my abilities.
Thank you very much for this amazing presentation. It was really interesting topic, Major Dane. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You're welcome.
So during the presentation, we received question that the audience have. So let's continue with that question. I just like to hand over to David to get your start with some question from the public. So, David, vamos a iniciar con la sesión de preguntas.
Perfecto. Sí, tenemos algunas preguntas que nos han enviado los alumnos. Vamos a empezar con la primera que hemos recibido, que dice así. El 4 de agosto Alemania violará la neutralidad belga, a pesar de estar contemplado por los tratados desde 1839. Herida de muerte por esa agresión, Bélgica saldrá de la guerra en pocas semanas. En tu opinión, ¿estaba el ejército belga bien preparado para combatir y resistir valerosamente la invasión alemana de 1914?
Okay, the first question is about August German violated Belgian neutrality, despite the fact that it was provided for the treaties on 1839. Mortally wounded by this aggression, Belgium will leave the war in a few weeks. In your opinion, was the Belgian army well prepared to fight and bravely resist the German invasion?
No, the Belgian army was woefully unprepared when the Germans attacked. It came as a surprise. Belgium had been kept neutral, for example, during the conflict between the Prussians and the French in 1870, 1871. And a lot of politicians thought that this time again it would remain neutral. So the Belgians hadn't really invested a lot in their army until at the very end. Also, for example, the recruitment system made that we had an army that even on war time was only 117,000 strong as far as the field army is concerned, and they had to take on 3.7 million Germans. So that's already, as far as manpower is concerned, is completely inadequate. Also, the fact that they had materials dating from the 1850s and training from that period roughly as well, meant that when the Germans came, especially with a lot of artillery support, a lot of machine guns, that the Belgians were just swept away by that. We were mainly saved by the invasions at the Iser River. It could have been a lot worse, actually.
Thank you, Major Day. So we continue with the next question. David, tenemos una segunda pregunta por parte de la audiencia. Ahí ya.
Sí, la siguiente pregunta es la siguiente. Los belgas habían estado mucho tiempo resguardados tras el escudo de neutralidad e incluso la cuestión misma de mantener un ejército que estaba puesto en entredicho desde ciertos medios. Sin embargo, la amenaza que ejercían las potencias vecinas animó al Ejecutivo belga a dotar al país de recursos militares. En caso de agresión a Bélgica, ¿crees que solo le podían presentar dos únicas alternativas? Tener que esperar a la intervención armada de una potencia garante o dotarse, en este caso, de un ejército y de fortificaciones capaces de disuadir, en este caso, de la invasión alemana.
Okay, we have the second question for that. The Belgians had long been sheltered behind the shield of neutrality, and even the very question of maintain an army one question of certain circles. And however, the threat posed by neighboring powers encouraged the Belgian executive to provide the country with military resources. In the event of aggression, Belgium felt that it had only two alternatives: to wait for the army intervention or generate power, or equip itself with an army and fortifications capable of determining an invasions.
Mainly yes, and that depends a bit on the point of view of different political parties. But it's clear in the 24 articles from 1839, okay, Belgium was indeed had a guaranteed neutrality by all the powers of the age, but it also clearly indicated that in the first time Belgium had to defend that neutrality itself. That's a part that a lot of the political parties in Belgium in the 19th century, second half 19th century, easily forgot, especially since military investment usually costs a lot of money. If you look at fortifications, if you look at equipping large armies as well. As far as King Leopold II was concerned, it had to be both. And so that's the reason why he invested a lot of his efforts and also try to get political parties on board to invest in both fortress systems. So they fortified in the 1880s and 1890s the Meuse River at Liège, directed towards the Germans, at Namur more directed towards the French. And then also Antwerp as a kind of bastion where they would hold out until the guarantors of the neutrality would show up. But unfortunately, depending on who you ask, the fact that Belgium had remained neutral in 1870, 1871 did a lot of wrong, because both parties, the ones who advocated a larger and a more powerful army, but also the ones who said that investing in the army was useless, they thought they had been right. The ones who didn't see investing in an army as interesting said, okay, we're neutral and it worked, our neutrality, so next time it will happen the same. Whilst the people who wanted to invest in an army during the mobilization of 1870, 1871, everything that could go wrong went wrong. It was a total shambles, and they said, okay, we need to invest because next time we won't be so lucky, and then we will have a serious problem on our hands, which they proved to be right.
Excellent answer. Thank you, Major Dave. David, continuamos con una siguiente pregunta.
Exacto, dice así, en 1898 el general Alfred von Schlieffen, jefe del Estado Mayor alemán, comenzaba a elaborar un plan que consistía en contener a las tropas rusas en el este y destruir rápidamente al ejército francés en el oeste, en primer lugar para luego volverse contra Rusia. La clave del éxito residía en la rapidez de la acción y para lograrlo el ejército alemán debía rodear el sistema defensivo Chef de Rivière. Para derrotar a Francia era necesario que el ejército alemán invadiera Luxemburgo y la neutral Bélgica a través del plan Schlieffen.
Okay, the third question that have some our students is about in 1898, General Alfred von Schlieffen, chief of the German General Staff, began to elaborate a plan that consists in containing the Russian troops in the east and quickly destroying the French army in the west, first of all, and then turning against Russia. The key to success lay in the speed of the action, and to achieve it, the German army had to surround the defense systems, the reverse. To defeat the France, was it necessary for the German army to invade Luxembourg and neutral Belgium through the Schlieffen plan?
Germany didn't have much other options. They needed to defeat France as fast as possible. 6 weeks was their calculated window of opportunity. This was also the 6 weeks that they needed in 1870, 1871 to defeat, well, the majority of the French forces. Since that war, the French had heavily defended their frontier, their border with Germany, and so Germany was only left with the choice to get through a less well-defended area. In this case, okay, Luxembourg, that was not defended at all. Belgium, that was a lot less defended, and during the original Schlieffen plan, also the Netherlands, or part of the Netherlands, part of the southern part of the Netherlands. Von Moltke changed the plan to leave the Netherlands out of it, and so that actually made the advance through Belgium even more important, especially the events that happened at Liège, where they had to subdue the 12 fortresses as fast as possible so they could continue their march towards France.
Thank you, Major Dave.
No.
Y vamos con una última pregunta para no correr un poco el cronograma que tenemos para el día de hoy.
Sí, en la siguiente y última pregunta, Laura dice así, nuestro alumno, que nos preguntaba, en los combates de Lieja, el ejército belga estaba decidido a resistir, lo que sorprendió realmente a las tropas alemanas. El rey Alberto I dirigía el ejército. Su objetivo eran 3 importantes acciones. La primera, resistir a las tropas alemanas. La segunda, ralentizar la posición enemiga y así evitar la destrucción del ejército belga. Y proteger el reducto nacional de Amberes. ¿Crees que en la estrategia belga era necesaria y vital la ayuda británica y francesa para evitar así la derrota del ejército ante los alemanes?
Okay, the final question that we have right now for some of our public is about, in the fighting of the League, the Belgian army was determined to resist, which surprised the Germans. King Albert led the army. Its objective was 3 important actions: to resist the German troops, slow down the enemy position, and thus avoid the destruction of the Belgian army, and protect the national stronghold of Antwerp. And the question for that is, do you think that in the Belgian strategy was necessary and vital the British and French helped to avoid the defeat of the army before the Germans?
Pretty much so. When the Germans gave Belgium an ultimatum on 2nd of August, and they gave us 24 hours to think about letting the German army pass through Belgium. King Albert and his Crown Council immediately shut down that proposal and said they realized, okay, if we do that, we lose all political credibility towards the outside, so we have no other option but to resist. They knew it was going to be a very difficult struggle. Everybody knew that, for example, the fortresses of Liège would not be able to hold out against the Germans because even without the extra additional heavy artillery used by the Germans. The Belgian artillery officers had already seen German artillery in action, and the kinetic energy of German heavy artillery was already twice that of when the fortresses were being built. So in no way the fortress would held out. It was mainly a point of showing actual fighting spirit and showing towards the exterior parties, the French and the British notably, okay, we are fighting for our own country. And so in that respect, brave little Belgium became a coined term, and the British and the French had to intervene to protect that neutrality. You could a little bit compare it to the Russian invasion of Ukraine nowadays, but it's not entirely the same, but there are similarities. And okay, once the fighting had started, King Albert did anything possible to save the Belgian army for as long as possible, and that's also the reason why they even when only a minor defeat at, for example, Tirlemont, instead of sending in reinforcements, they decided to immediately retreat towards Antwerp. And the moment Antwerp was attacked, okay, they immediately retreated towards the Iser River. So he knew very well that against the German army, the Belgian army didn't really stand a chance. But it was important to show the outside world, okay, we're here and we're doing what we can, even though it's limited to try to stop the German attack through our country.
Thank you, an excellent answer, Major Dave. Thank you very much. Yep. So thank you very much, Major Dave, for providing such a great presentation to the audience. I think that was really an amazing presentation. Thank you very much for your time.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much for having me.
So I would like to give the floor to David to give a brief summary of what we've seen in the presentation. So, David, te cedo la palabra para iniciar con un breve resumen de lo que vimos el día de hoy en esta presentación.
Muchas gracias, Laura. Bueno, agradecer al mayor Dave Warnier de la Real Academia Militar de Bélgica en Bruselas su excelente participación en este seminario sobre la Primera Guerra Mundial y felicitarle por su magnífica ponencia sobre un pequeño ejército en la Gran Guerra, el ejército belga durante la Primera Guerra Mundial, 1914-1918. El mayor Dave Warnier nos ha ilustrado con un magnífico análisis histórico sobre la organización del ejército al inicio de la Gran Guerra y su evolución al inicio y durante las hostilidades. Recordemos que los belgas habían estado mucho tiempo resguardados tras el escudo de la neutralidad e incluso la cuestión misma de poder mantener un ejército que estaba puesto en entredicho desde ciertos medios. Sin embargo, la amenaza que ejercían las potencias vecinas pues animó al ejecutivo belga a dotar al país de importantes recursos militares. Los asuntos de defensa, como los exteriores, figuraban también entre las prerrogativas del rey. En caso de agresión, a Bélgica se la presentaban dos alternativas muy importantes: tener que esperar a la intervención armada de una potencia galante o dotarse de un ejército y de fortificaciones capaces de poder de esa manera disuadir de una invasión alemana, que finalmente llegaría en agosto de 1914. Y con ello, pues este breve resumen de la interesante aportación que nos ha realizado el mayor de Warnier sobre la estructura y organización del ejército belga y sus principales combates durante la invasión alemana de 1914, que dio inicio a la Primera Guerra Mundial.
Thank you, Major Dave.
Thank you, Dave.
You're welcome.
So we want to say thank you to all the speakers who were present on the second day of the seminar on the World War I. Without a doubt, they have been magnificent presentation. Remember that tomorrow we continue with more interesting topic on our third day of the seminar organized by INISEC. Thank you very much and see you tomorrow with more of this event. See you and have a rest of the day.